What's up, guys? Welcome to Supreme Harry. We've got something special today. What if Harry woke up at age 6 as Lord Potter-Black-Peverell and sued Dumbledore for 10 million galleons? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The morning everything changed. The dream didn't fade the way dreams usually do. Harry had learned, in his first life, that the worst memories were the ones that clung: Cedric's body hitting the ground, Sirius falling through the veil, the green light in the forest that turned out to be less of an ending than he'd expected. Those memories had weight. They had texture. They didn't dissolve into the gauzy nothing of morning the way ordinary dreams did. So when he opened his eyes on the morning of July 31st and stared up at the slanted ceiling of the cupboard under the stairs, and the memories didn't fade, didn't blur at the edges or lose their color or slip away like water through fingers, he understood immediately that something was different this time. He was 6 years old. He remembered being 6 years old the first time, and it had felt nothing like this. The first time, 6 had meant hunger and hand-me-downs and a faint, sourceless bewilderment at why the world seemed to operate on rules nobody had explained to him. It had meant Dudley's fists and Aunt Petunia's shrieking and Uncle Vernon's particular shade of puce. It had meant small magic that burst out of him in moments of fear or frustration, and the punishment that followed, and the learning, very quickly, to make himself small and unnoticeable and grateful for what scraps of tolerance the Dursleys allowed him. Now he lay in the dark of the cupboard, listening to the house settle around him, and he took a careful breath and ran through everything he remembered with the methodical precision of a man cataloguing his weapons before a battle. Tom Riddle. 7 Horcruxes, though one was destroyed before Harry was born. The diary. The ring. The locket. The cup. The diadem. Nagini. And Harry himself, the unintended one, the accident, the piece of soul that had lodged in his scar on the night Lily Potter chose to die for her son. All of it intact in his memory, sharp and clear. Dumbledore. The greater good. The plan that had required Harry to walk into the forest and die, which Dumbledore had known from the moment he read Trelawney's prophecy and decided not to mention it. The years of deliberate neglect, the careful cultivation of a weapon rather than a person, the way every protection had come with a leash attached. The will. He remembered the will that had never been properly executed, James and Lily Potter naming Sirius Black as guardian, naming Augusta Longbottom as secondary guardian, naming Remus Lupin as tertiary. None of which had mattered, because Dumbledore had placed him with the Dursleys on his own authority and the Ministry had been too grateful and too frightened and too thoroughly managed to ask uncomfortable questions. The estates. The vaults. The seats. Harry pressed his fingertips against the wall of the cupboard and felt, for the first time, the shape of what he was. He was Lord Harry James Potter, heir to an ancient estate and a seat on the Wisingamot that had sat vacant since his father's death. He was Lord Harry Black, heir presumptive through Sirius, who had been thrown in Azkaban without trial and was currently rotting in a cell while his innocence went unexamined and his estate was managed by people who had every reason to prefer him stay exactly where he was. He was Lord Harry Peverell, through his father's line, reaching back further than almost anyone alive remembered, to the 3 brothers and the objects they'd supposedly won from death, 2 of which Harry had held in his own hands. 3 seats. 3 vaults. 3 sets of ancient rights and privileges and protections under British wizarding law that nobody had ever thought to activate on his behalf, because the boy who lived was much more useful as an orphan than as a lord. Harry sat up very carefully, because the cupboard was not built for sitting up, and he thought about what he was going to do next. He was 6 years old. He weighed, he estimated, somewhere around 40 pounds. He could not yet perform magic with a wand, because he didn't have one, and underage magic had the tracking charm issue besides, though he was fairly certain, now that he thought about it carefully, that the trace could not detect accidental magic in a household with adult witches and wizards, and the Dursleys' household most definitely contained Petunia, who was Lily Evans' sister and who had, whatever she pretended otherwise, grown up alongside magic her whole childhood. That was, in fact, the entire reason Dumbledore had placed Harry here. The blood wards ran on Petunia's relationship to Lily, which meant Petunia had a thread of old magic in her, dormant and disowned and furious about it, but there. Which meant the trace was probably useless here regardless. But he didn't need a wand for what he was about to do. He needed a quill, ink, and parchment. He needed the address of Gringotts Bank, which he had memorized when he was 11 and had not forgotten. And he needed to find an owl. He was 6 years old, it was 4 in the morning, and he had approximately 5 years before Tom Riddle rose again. He'd worked with worse odds. Harry pushed open the cupboard door with the particular care of someone who had spent years learning which hinges squeaked, unfolded himself into the hallway, and padded toward the kitchen in his 2 large socks. The Dursley house at 4 in the morning was a different creature than it was during the day. Without Vernon's bluster filling every room and Petunia's anxious hovering and Dudley's thundering weight on every stair, it was just a house, generic and slightly too warm, smelling of Petunia's cleaning products and last night's beef roast. Harry moved through it with the ease of someone who had navigated it blind, found the kitchen drawer where Petunia kept her good stationery, cream paper, not quite parchment, but it would do, and extracted 2 sheets along with a ballpoint pen, because there was no quill to be found in number 4, Privet Drive, and ballpoints worked fine if you wrote carefully. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark and thought about what to write. The letter to Gringotts needed to accomplish 3 things simultaneously. It needed to invoke his right as heir apparent of House Potter to a formal inheritance assessment. It needed to flag the issue of his illegal magical guardianship, because Dumbledore had never been named his guardian in any legally valid document, had simply acted as one and let everyone assume the paperwork existed somewhere. And it needed, without revealing how he knew any of this, to raise the question of Sirius Black's trial. Or lack thereof. He wrote for 20 minutes, scratching carefully in his neatest 6-year-old hand, which was not very neat but was clear enough. He wrote 3 separate letters, one to Gringotts, formal and precise, invoking ancient inheritance law and requesting an immediate account review and the assignment of a family account manager. One to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, which he would not send yet but wanted drafted. And one very short note that he folded separately and addressed to no one in particular, which simply read, "Check whether Sirius Orion Black was given a trial before being sent to Azkaban. Check the date. Check the records. Someone should have checked this years ago." He would send that one anonymously. He had not decided yet through which channel. He sealed the Gringotts letter and set it aside, then sat back and looked at the window above the sink, where the first grey-blue suggestion of dawn was beginning to ink itself into the sky. The question of the owl was a problem. He did not have Hedwig yet. Hedwig came with Hagrid and the letter in Diagon Alley, which was still 5 years away on the original timeline. He was not going to wait 5 years. He thought about this for a moment, then got up, went to the window, opened it 4 inches, enough, and sat back down. It took 40 minutes. He spent them rereading his letters and making small corrections and listening to the house sleep above him, and then there was a soft thump on the windowsill and a barn owl he had never seen before peered in at him with the mild professional interest of a post owl for hire. Harry looked at it. It looked at him. He held up the Gringotts letter. "Gringotts Bank, London," he said quietly. "I need a response." The owl took the letter with the practiced ease of its kind and was gone before Petunia's alarm went off upstairs. Harry washed his hands at the sink, put the remaining letters in his sock, and was back in the cupboard with the door pulled mostly shut before he heard his aunt's feet hit the bedroom floor. He lay in the dark and stared at the slanted ceiling and thought about Sirius at 22, falsely accused, handed to the Dementors by a system that had wanted very badly not to look at its own failures. Sirius at 36, gaunt and laughing in equal measure, burning through the fog of Azkaban on pure stubborn fury. Sirius at 37, falling through the veil with a surprised look on his face, because he'd never quite believed something could actually kill him. Not this time, Harry thought, with a certainty that felt like bedrock. He had 5 years before Hogwarts. He had 3 noble and ancient houses and whatever resided in their vaults, including the Potter Library which he had learned, far too late, contained some of the most comprehensive magical research in Britain. He had a memory that covered 17 years of magical education, 2 wars, and 1 death. He had the knowledge of where every Horcrux was, what they were, and approximately when each one needed to be dealt with. And he had, somewhere in his chest, a particular quality of anger, not hot, not frantic, but steady and deep and almost warm, like banked coals. The kind that didn't burn itself out quickly. He had quite a lot to work with. The owl came back that afternoon. Harry intercepted it at the kitchen window while Petunia was putting Dudley down for a nap and Uncle Vernon was watching football in the lounge. The response was on thick cream parchment with the Gringotts goblin seal, a crest that looked like crossed axes over a pile of coins, and it was written in the precise, slightly archaic English that goblins used when they were being formal and very, very interested in what you'd said. To the honored heir of House Potter, it began, your request for inheritance assessment has been received and noted with significant attention. We confirm that the Potter accounts have remained under administrative management since the deaths of Lord James Charles Potter and Lady Lily Euphemia Potter Evans on the 31st of October, 1981. The absence of a formal guardian appointment in our records is a matter of significant legal irregularity that we are prepared to address at your earliest convenience. Further, we note your inquiry regarding associated houses. Gringotts is prepared to facilitate a full lordship assessment including all houses to which you may hold claim. We await your visit at your earliest convenience, and note that Gringotts is fully prepared to provide transportation assistance for account holders in unusual circumstances. Iron Hook, Senior Account Manager, Potter Estate. Harry read it twice, folded it into his sock alongside his other letters, and went back to washing the lunch dishes that were his afternoon chore, because he was 6 years old and covered by the trace, technically, and he needed to be very careful about the order in which he did things. He thought about Dumbledore, probably sitting in his office right now, Twinkle fully operational, monitoring the enchantments he'd placed on number 4. Harry had felt those enchantments this morning, running his hands along the inside walls of the cupboard, subtle things, layered carefully, the kind of magic that only a very experienced practitioner would even detect. Monitoring charms. A subtle compulsion woven into the words themselves, a gentle push toward gratitude and smallness that would operate below the level of conscious notice for anyone who hadn't been specifically looking for it. Harry had been looking for it. He'd known it was there. He'd thought about it for hours this morning, circling it carefully, and he'd reached a decision. He was not going to dismantle those wards yet. He was going to leave them exactly where they were. Because if he dismantled them, Dumbledore would know. And Harry needed Dumbledore to spend the next several weeks entirely confident that everything was proceeding according to plan, that his weapon was being properly shaped in the dark, that the boy who lived was learning his smallness right on schedule. He needed that window of false security. He had things to arrange. The Gringotts visit came 4 days later. It came because on day 2, Harry wrote a second letter, this one to the Gringotts representative, explaining that he was unable to travel independently due to his age and living situation, and requesting, formally, that a Gringotts representative be dispatched to perform a preliminary inheritance ritual at his current location, noting that this was within Gringotts' established rights under the Goblin Wizard Accord of 1752, Section 7, Paragraph 3, which allowed account managers to visit account holders who were minors in circumstances of legal irregularity. He'd had to look the specific clause up in his memory, turning it over carefully, not entirely sure he was right, but he was close enough that the goblins, who respected precision, would either confirm it or correct it, and either way they would know he knew the law. The response came back the next morning, we will attend at 9 a.m. on Saturday. Petunia had nearly fainted. There had been 2 of them, Iron Hook, who was short even by goblin standards and had the look of someone who had been doing accounting for longer than some countries had existed, and a second goblin who introduced himself only as Sharpclaw and carried a leather satchel that clinked faintly when he walked. They had appeared at the front door of number 4, Privet Drive at precisely 9 in the morning, and the effect on Vernon and Petunia had been extraordinary. Vernon had gone through approximately 4 shades of red before landing on a stunned beige. Petunia had gripped the door frame and said, in a voice entirely unlike her normal one, "You can't, we are here at the invitation of Lord Potter," Iron Hook had said, with the particular tone goblins used when they were very politely implying that your objections were irrelevant and also slightly amusing. "We require a room." Preferably a table. They'd used the kitchen. Harry had sat across from Ironhook and Sharpclaw at the kitchen table where he'd written his letters 4 days ago, while Vernon stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track, and Petunia stood very still by the refrigerator looking like she was considering whether there was a universe in which she could simply pretend this wasn't happening. The inheritance ritual is straightforward, Ironhook said, setting a shallow stone bowl on the table and producing what appeared to be a very small, very sharp silver knife from his jacket. 3 drops of blood onto the assessment stone. The results will be immediate and legally binding under goblin law and wizarding law both. I know, Harry said. Ironhook's eyes, which were amber and very sharp, settled on him for a moment. Do you? Section 12 of the Goblin Banking Accord. Results of an inheritance assessment are admissible in wizarding courts as primary documentation of lineage and legal standing. They supersede any secondary documentation including birth certificates, wills under dispute, or administrative guardianship assignments. Sharpclaw made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Ironhook said nothing for a moment, then extended the silver knife, handle first. 3 drops. Harry pressed 3 drops of blood into the bowl, which was filled with something that looked like water but wasn't, and the reaction was immediate and frankly spectacular. The liquid turned gold, then deep red, then settled into a swirling silver, and Sharpclaw leaned forward with an expression that Harry recognized. He'd seen it on Hermione's face during particularly satisfying research moments. The results appeared on parchment that Sharpclaw produced and filled itself in ink the color of old bronze. Harrison James Potter-Black-Peverell, heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, confirmed heir to the most ancient and noble house of Black, confirmed, by right of blood adoption clause in the will of Sirius Orion Black, will flagged, executor not yet confirmed, see administrative note, heir to the most ancient and noble house of Peverell, confirmed, through paternal line lordship status. All 3 houses available for immediate claim upon application. No currently living adult lord present to contest. Administrative note, the will of Lord James Charles Potter, dated September 12, 1981, names Sirius Orion Black as magical guardian and executor of all Potter estates. This will has never been formally probated. Current estate management is listed as administrative hold. This constitutes a significant legal irregularity under goblin banking law and wizarding inheritance law both. Gringotts notes for the record that no instruction to deviate from the named guardian's authority was ever received from Lord Potter's estate, and that the current management structure was imposed by external authority without proper documentation. Ironhook looked up from the parchment. His expression was carefully neutral, which on a goblin's face meant he was feeling something quite strongly. I'll be claiming all 3 lordships today, Harry said. You are 6 years old, Ironhook observed. I am aware. Wizarding law states that a minor may claim a lordship in the absence of a living adult heir, provided a competent magical guardian is either named or the lordship itself acts as legal majority grant. Section 4 of the Noble Houses Act of 1612, modified in 1798, Harry said. The lordship of a most ancient and noble house grants legal majority in specific circumstances. All 3 of my houses qualify. The precedent is Edwina Pruitt, 1743, who claimed the Pruitt lordship at age 8 following her father's death and was recognized as legally an adult for purposes of estate management and Wiesengemot representation. The silence in the kitchen was very loud. Vernon had stopped breathing audibly, which was unusual. Sharpclaw was definitely smiling. We will need, Ironhook said at last, to make several arrangements. Yes, Harry said. Starting with Sirius Black. Ironhook's expression shifted, not much, but Harry had learned to read people in 17 years of living with his life on the line. There was something there. Attention, sharp and concentrated. The will names him guardian, Harry said. The will was never probated. He was imprisoned without trial. I'd like to know if Gringotts has any record of an official trial proceeding, because I've been given to understand that no such record may exist, and if that's the case then his imprisonment was and has been illegal for the past 5 years, and as the primary beneficiary of his will I have both standing and motivation to file for his immediate release. Sharpclaw opened his satchel and produced 3 more documents. His movements had the quality of someone who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. "We have no record," Ironhook said, "of any trial proceeding for Sirius Orion Black. We have attempted on 2 separate occasions, as administrator of the Black estate, to inquire about the status of his conviction and have received responses that we would describe as deliberately uninformative." Harry nodded slowly. "And if I were to file for release on grounds of unlawful imprisonment and request that his status as my magical guardian be formally activated, Gringotts would support that filing," Ironhook said. "Fully and formally. We have our own interest in the correct administration of the Black estate, which has been in a state of legal ambiguity for 5 years and is costing everyone involved a great deal in administrative complexity." He paused. "Also, what was done to Sirius Black was wrong." It was the most direct thing Harry had ever heard a goblin say about anything that wasn't money. "Then let's start there," Harry said. The paperwork took 3 hours. Petunia served biscuits at the 2-hour mark, which Harry thought was either an olive branch or a nervous habit, and Vernon eventually retreated to the lounge and turned the television up very loud, which was his way of pretending that the things happening in his kitchen were not his problem. Harry signed 37 documents. He signed as Lord Harrison James Potter-Black-Peverell, which was going to cause Dumbledore approximately the same level of distress as finding a hornet's nest in his sherbet lemon tin. He signed papers claiming the Potter lordship, the Black lordship in its heir-apparent form pending Sirius's legal situation, and the Peverell lordship, which had apparently been sitting unclaimed in Gringotts records for 2 generations because nobody in the Potter line had thought to ask about it, and Gringotts had been legally unable to bring it up without prompting. He signed the filing for Sirius's release from unlawful imprisonment, which cited no fewer than 12 violations of the Wizarding Prisoners' Rights Act of 1847, the most dramatic of which was simply Clause 1, every prisoner held in wizarding custody is entitled to a trial. He filed the formal complaint against the administrative management of the Potter estates without guardian authorization, which named no specific individual but cited the period from November 1, 1981 to present, and which Ironhook noted would automatically generate a ministry inquiry. And then, last, he signed the preliminary documentation for a civil suit against Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, for illegal guardianship assumption, interference with the lawful execution of a will, willful negligence in the placement of a minor in a documented abusive environment, and misappropriation of estate authority. Total claimed damages, 10 million galleons. Sharpclaw had filled in that number when Harry said it, without blinking, in the same tone one might use to note a particularly reasonable weather forecast. "Is that a realistic figure?" Harry asked, mostly out of curiosity. Given the 5 years of compounding interest on mismanaged estates, the documented psychological and physical impact of inappropriate placement, and the standard multiplier applied in cases involving abuse of institutional authority? Ironhook considered. "We would argue it is conservative." Harry looked at the document. His name at the bottom, in the slightly unsteady hand of a 6-year-old, looked absurd next to the florid Gringotts seals and the dense legal language above it. He thought about what Dumbledore's face was going to look like when this arrived. He signed. When the goblins left, Ironhook with a small bow that Harry suspected meant something significant in goblin custom and Sharpclaw with a look that suggested he was going to be telling this story for the next several decades, Harry stood in the kitchen and listened to the house. Vernon emerged from the lounge 20 minutes later. He stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at Harry with an expression that had moved through anger and contempt and come out somewhere unfamiliar on the other side, in territory Vernon Dursley's face hadn't visited much before. "What," Vernon said, "was all that?" Harry looked at him. He considered, for a moment, the old familiar instinct, make himself small, be vague, don't provoke, apologize reflexively. It surfaced and he watched it surface and then he let it go, the way you might release a fish back into water that you no longer needed. "That," Harry said, "was the beginning of me getting my life sorted out." Vernon stared at him. "You'll want to know," Harry said, that the Gringotts filing will likely trigger some attention from the ministry in the next few weeks. I'd expect an owl or possibly a ministry representative. Don't panic. I'd also like to move out of the cupboard. I'll take Dudley's second bedroom. Now you've been receiving a ministry stipend for my care, Harry said, not unkindly but without any softness around it either. It's in the Potter estate records. Dumbledore arranged it, 500 galleons a year, paid quarterly into an account at Barclays in Petunia's name. That stipend was conditional on my being provided adequate care, which by any reasonable standard, and now by a Gringotts legal filing, I have not been. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not trying to make trouble for you specifically. You were put in an impossible position by someone who should have known better. But things are going to be different now. Petunia had appeared behind Vernon. She was very pale, and she was looking at Harry with an expression he didn't entirely recognize, not affection, not the cold tolerance she usually had, but something more complicated and more uncomfortable, like she was seeing something she'd been working hard not to see for 5 years. "You're 6, she said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "You sound," she stopped. "Like her?" he asked, quietly, without malice. Petunia's jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes. "The second bedroom," Harry said. "I'll be needing it." He got it that evening. There was no discussion, no negotiation. Petunia simply began moving boxes into the main bedroom around 4 o'clock, and by dinner-time there was a cleared bed with fresh sheets and a window that opened properly. Vernon didn't speak at dinner. Dudley stared at Harry with the puzzled look of someone whose world had shifted slightly on its axis without explanation. Harry ate his dinner, a proper portion, which was another new development, and thought about the documents making their way to the ministry right now, filed through Gringotts' legal courier service, which was faster and rather more alarming than the owl post. He thought about Sirius in his cell. He thought about Dumbledore, who would not yet know. Would probably receive his first indication tomorrow or the day after, when the ministry inquiry notification crossed whatever monitoring charms he had on the Potter accounts. Harry imagined that moment, the moment the old man realized, with his formidable intelligence, exactly what had happened. That his carefully arranged chessboard had, while he wasn't watching, rearranged itself. Every piece was still in place. But one of them had stood up. That night, in his proper bedroom, small but real, with a window that showed him a strip of evening sky going from orange to purple to black, Harry lay on his back and let himself feel, just for a moment, the full weight of what he was doing. He was 6 years old and he had just filed a lawsuit against the most powerful wizard in Britain. The sensation was not fear. It was something adjacent to it, a charged, alive feeling, like standing in an open field when a storm was building on the horizon. His blood felt warm. His mind was running clean and fast, and he was very awake, and the sky outside his window was going dark blue now, the first stars appearing, and he thought about Sirius who might, if everything went right, be free within the month. He thought, I'm going to need allies. He thought, Augusta Longbottom. Amelia Bones. And Narcissa Malfoy, who loves her son more than she loves anything Voldemort ever promised her. He thought, I'm going to need to be very careful and also completely unafraid, and fortunately I have experience with both. A soft knock at the window startled him, which was ridiculous. He had survived Voldemort 4 times and he startled at a knock. He sat up and saw a ministry owl on the sill, official looking, carrying a small sealed envelope. He opened it. Lord Potter, it read. Your filings have been received by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. You are required to appear before the deputy head of the DMLE, Madame Amelia Bones, on the matter of the irregular imprisonment of Sirius Orain Black, at your earliest convenience. Gringotts Bank has formally corroborated your filing. We are proceeding under emergency review. Senior Aura Marcus Hodgkins, DMLE. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it on the windowsill and lay back down. He had sent the letters 4 days ago. It had taken 4 days to get here, and he was already inside the ministry's formal processes, and Gringotts was already on the record as corroborating, and Sirius was already under emergency review. He had 5 years before Voldemort came back. He had 3 ancient houses and their resources and their legal standing. He had 17 years of memory and the particular, strange advantage of knowing exactly how everything was supposed to go wrong. He thought about Dumbledore sitting in his office right now, unaware. Probably having sherbet lemons. Probably congratulating himself on the elegant long game of shaping the boy who lived into the man who would sacrifice himself. Not this time, Harry thought again. He closed his eyes, and this time when sleep came, it didn't bring any nightmares. It brought something much quieter and much stranger, the sensation of a man who has been running for a very long time, finally, planting his feet. Outside, July had settled into a warm, still darkness, and number 4, Privet Drive sat in its ordinary suburban silence, and somewhere in the magical world that hummed along just underneath the surface of everything, the first ripples of what Harry had set in motion were already spreading outward, through Gringotts' legal channels, through the ministry's formal processes, through the quiet tremors of ancient magic activating in response to a lord claiming his birthright. Tomorrow there would be more letters to write. More alliances to build. More pieces to move. Tonight, Harry slept. Chapter 2, 10 million galleons. The Ministry of Magic smelled exactly the way Harry remembered, that particular combination of old parchment, bureaucratic anxiety, and the faint ozone tang of spells cast in enclosed spaces over many decades. The fireplaces along the atrium wall blazed green in sequence, and the golden fountain in the center caught the light from the enchanted ceiling and threw it in patterns across the polished floor. Harry walked through it at Ironhook's side and did not look like someone who was nervous, because he wasn't. He was wearing proper robes. Gringotts had arranged them, deep green with a simple cut, nothing ostentatious, but the fabric was quality, and the Potter crest was embroidered at the collar in gold thread that caught the light exactly once and then settled into subtlety, the way old money always did. He was still 6 years old. He was approximately the height of Ironhook's shoulder. The combination produced a fascinating range of expressions on the faces of ministry employees as they crossed the atrium. A young witch carrying a stack of files stopped walking entirely and stared. Harry nodded at her politely. She dropped 2 of her files. Ironhook said nothing. He'd been saying nothing with particular eloquence all morning, which Harry was beginning to understand was his version of amusement. The meeting with Amelia Bones was in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, 4th floor, in a conference room that had windows charmed to show a grey London sky that might or might not reflect what was actually outside. Madame Bones was already there when they arrived, a broad-shouldered woman with a monocle and grey-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing robes the color of old slate. She had a stack of files on the table in front of her and the look of someone who had been doing hard thinking since very early in the morning. Beside her sat a younger wizard with ink-stained fingers and the slightly hunted look of a man who'd been asked to take notes on something he wasn't sure how to describe in official documentation. Harry sat across from Amelia Bones, folded his hands on the table, and waited. She looked at him for a long moment. Her monocle caught the light. "Lord Potter," she said, and the title came out with only a small hesitation, the kind that meant she'd already processed the strangeness of applying it and was moving forward. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me on short notice," Harry said. "I appreciate the urgency the DMLE has applied to this." "I want to be direct with you," she said. "This is an unusual situation." "I imagine it is. You are 6 years old." "I've been told that several times this week," Harry said. "It remains accurate." The ink-stained wizard made a sound. Amelia Bones' mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "The matter of Sirius Black," she said, opening the top file. "Our records show he was taken into custody on the 1st of November, 1981, following the events at Godric's Hollow and an incident on a Muggle street in which 12 Muggles were killed and Peter Pettigrew was, apparently, killed." She paused. "I say apparently. Pettigrew is alive," Harry said. "He's an unregistered animagus. Rat form. He faked his death, framed Sirius, and spent the next decade hiding. He's currently living with a wizarding family as their pet. The silence in the room was very complete. That's quite an allegation, Amelia said carefully. It is. I understand it will require investigation and evidence, and I'm prepared to support that investigation. Blood magic testing of the scene in Godric's Hollow would show traces of a rat animagus transformation if the original site were tested. The Pettigrew family plot contains no body, because there was no body to bury. Pettigrew cut off his own finger before transforming. Veritaserum administered to Sirius Black would confirm everything I've said within about 40 seconds. He paused. But that's secondary to the immediate issue. The immediate issue is that Sirius Black has been imprisoned for 5 years with no trial. That is illegal regardless of whether he's guilty or innocent. Section 1 of the Wizarding Prisoners' Rights Act. He is entitled to a trial that he has never received. Amelia Bones sat back in her chair and looked at Harry with an expression that reminded him, sharply and unexpectedly, of the way Hermione had sometimes looked at particularly elegant magical theory, recognition mixed with something like wariness. "You're correct," she said. "He is entitled to a trial. There is no record in our system of a trial ever being scheduled." She turned 2 pages in her file. "There is a record of a recommendation from Chief Warlock Dumbledore that given the extraordinary circumstances, formal proceedings were not necessary. That recommendation," Ironhook said, speaking for the first time, "is not a legal substitute for a trial." "No," Amelia agreed. "It is not. And any conviction, formal or informal, obtained without trial is void under Clause 7 of the same Act," Harry said. "Which means Sirius Black is not currently a convicted criminal. He is a man who has been illegally imprisoned for 5 years. The Ministry's liability in this matter is significant." The ink-stained wizard had stopped pretending to take notes and was just staring. "I want him released under emergency review," Harry said. "Immediately, pending formal trial proceedings. Gringotts is prepared to stand surety for his appearance, as administrator of the Black Estate. I'm prepared to stand as his magical guardian advocate. The legal provision for minor lords acting in guardianship matters is established in the Noble Houses Act." He slid a document across the table, which Ironhook had prepared this morning. "This is the formal request." Amelia Bones took the document and read it. She read it carefully, turning each page. The room was quiet enough that Harry could hear the enchanted sky outside shifting from grey to something that might have been attempting cloud formations. "Sirius Black may be a Death Eater," she said, without looking up from the page. "He may not be," Harry said. "That's what trials are for." She looked up at that. "I want justice," Harry said, and he kept his voice level and clear, without heat. "Not revenge, not vindication, justice. Proper process. A trial with evidence and testimony and a verdict reached by people who've actually examined the facts. If he's guilty, let it be proven. If he's innocent, let that be proven instead. But 5 years without either is an embarrassment to the system you've spent your career building." It was, he knew, exactly the right thing to say to Amelia Bones. Not because it was calculated, because it was true, and she could hear truth when it was spoken to her, and she had spent her career caring about the integrity of the law with the particular fervor of someone who had seen what happened when it was compromised. She closed the file. "I'll authorize the emergency review," she said. "Black will be transferred from Azkaban to Ministry holding for medical assessment within 48 hours. Formal trial proceedings will be scheduled within 30 days. She looked at Ironhook. "Gringotts' surety is accepted." "The Ministry has made a sound decision," Ironhook said, in the tone of someone bestowing a moderate compliment. Harry stood and extended his hand across the table, which Amelia Bones shook with the slightly bemused expression of someone who was going to be thinking about this meeting for quite some time. "One more thing," Harry said. "The notification of the broader civil filing, the suit against Dumbledore, has been received," she said. "Yes. That is," she stopped. "That is a different matter entirely. It is, Harry agreed. But it's connected. The same institutional negligence that allowed Sirius Black to rot in Azkaban for 5 years without a trial is what allowed my illegal placement with the Dursleys. The same authority structure. The same willingness to let one man's judgment override legal process. He picked up his document folder, which Ironhook had helpfully provided, and tucked it under his arm. I'll be pursuing both. He was at the door when Amelia Bones said, quietly, Lord Potter. He turned. She had her elbows on the table and was looking at him with the monocle slightly askew, which on her face meant she was being genuinely informal. How are you? She paused. Are you all right? In that house? It was the first time anyone had asked him that. Straight out, without agenda, without it being connected to something else. He thought about what to say and decided, because it was Amelia Bones and she deserved it, to be honest. I've been better, he said. I will be, soon. She nodded, once, and said nothing else. He walked out with Ironhook, back through the ministry corridors, and the awareness of what was coming next settled over him like the moment before a storm breaks. 3 days later, Dumbledore came to Privet Drive. Harry had been expecting it. The timing was slightly ahead of his estimate. He'd thought it might take a week, but the letter from Gringotts confirming the ministry inquiry must have landed on a day when Dumbledore had particularly good intelligence networks operating. He arrived on a Wednesday morning, appearing at the end of Privet Drive the way he always did, long robes, half-moon glasses, the full silver-bearded magnificence of the most famous wizard alive. Harry was in the back garden, doing the weeding that was his morning chore. He'd decided to keep doing chores for now, because the appearance of normalcy was worth something, and he heard the doorbell and Petunia's footsteps and then the particular charged silence that followed when the person at the door was someone she hadn't been expecting and couldn't quite bring herself to turn away. He gave it 90 seconds, then walked inside, leaving his gardening gloves on the back step. Dumbledore was in the lounge, sitting in the armchair that was officially Vernon's and which he had apparently simply sat down in without asking. Petunia was perched on the edge of the sofa looking like a woman who had swallowed something rectangular. There was tea on the coffee table, because Petunia's reflex for unexpected guests was always tea, and Dumbledore was looking at it with benign pleasure, as though this were a pleasant social call. Harry came in, sat on the sofa beside Petunia, and looked at Dumbledore. The old man looked back at him. The blue eyes were as Harry remembered, clever and warm and capable of making you feel, without anything being explicitly said, that he saw you more completely than most people could, and that his seeing was a gift. Harry had found this quality deeply reassuring at 11. At 6, with 17 years of additional information to apply to it, he found it considerably less persuasive. Harry, Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone who had rehearsed warmth so long it had become natural. It's good to see you. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. I wasn't expecting you personally. I assumed you'd send a representative. A small pause. Just a fraction of one. I prefer to handle important matters myself, Dumbledore said. That's actually one of the issues I've cited in the filing, Harry said pleasantly. Another pause. Longer this time. The blue eyes remained warm, but something behind them was recalibrating with the speed of a very good chess player who has just registered that the board is not what he thought it was. You're filing with Gringotts, Dumbledore said. And with the ministry. Yes. Harry. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, the posture of someone who wanted to convey earnest sincerity. I understand that you may have been given information that seems. I wasn't given information, Harry said. I filed an inheritance request. The information came back from Gringotts' own records and the ministry's own files. Your name appears in both, in ways that are legally problematic. The decisions I made were made to protect you. From what specifically? Harry asked. Because the filing addresses several distinct issues, and I'd like to understand which protection you're describing. Was it protection when you placed me with the Dursleys against my parents' explicit written instructions? Was it protection when you failed to initiate the probate of my parents' will for 5 years? Was it protection when you allowed Sirius Black to be imprisoned without trial, despite knowing that the will named him my guardian and that confirming his guilt or innocence was therefore directly relevant to my welfare? He kept his voice conversational and curious, not accusatory. I'm genuinely asking, because I'd like to understand the logic. Dumbledore was very still. You are, he said slowly, a remarkable child. I'm a lord of 3 ancient houses who has been living in a cupboard, Harry said. And I think you should probably have your legal representative contact Gringotts directly, because the formal hearing is scheduled for the 22nd and there are a number of documents you'll want to review before then. The silence stretched. Petunia stood up abruptly, said, "More tea," and left the room at a pace that suggested she intended to stay in the kitchen until all of this had resolved itself. Dumbledore looked at Harry. The warmth was still in his expression, but it had a different quality now, more careful, more assessing. You've been very busy, he said. I've been busy, yes, Harry agreed. I had 5 years of backlog to address. There are things, Dumbledore said, that you don't know. Things I have kept from you for your protection. I will not apologize for that. The situation is complex in ways that, I'm aware of the Horcruxes, Harry said. The air in the room changed. It didn't move, didn't shift temperature, but it changed, the way a room changes when a window you didn't know was closed has opened. Dumbledore's expression did something Harry had never seen it do in his first life, or at least never recognized for what it was. It went blank. Not neutral, blank. The blankness of a man whose model of the situation has just fractured. I'm aware of all of them, Harry said, keeping his voice level. I know what they are, where they are, and what needs to be done about them. That is a separate matter from the legal proceedings, and I'm prepared to discuss it with you at an appropriate time, through appropriate channels, with appropriate witnesses and documentation. But I am not prepared to have that discussion used as leverage against the legal accountability questions, which are going to proceed regardless. Dumbledore set down his teacup very carefully on its saucer. You are 6 years old, he said. You're the third person to mention that to me this week, Harry said. It doesn't change anything. It changes, how? Harry asked, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice, not anger, something steadier than anger. How does my age change the fact that my parents' will was never executed? How does it change the fact that there's no trial record for Sirius Black? How does it change the fact that the Potter estate has been mismanaged without authorization for 5 years? None of those things are age-dependent. They're either legal or they're not. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The half-moon glasses caught the morning light from the lounge window, and behind them the blue eyes were doing something complicated that Harry chose not to try to read. I will be in contact with my legal representative, Dumbledore said at last, in a voice from which every performance quality had been stripped. Good, Harry said. I look forward to the conversation. He stood. He was not quite the height of Dumbledore seated. He extended his hand, and after a beat Dumbledore took it and shook it, and Harry felt the subtle probe of legitimacy against his mental shields, which he had rebuilt from scratch this week, working from memory, tight and deep and layered, and met it with a surface calm that revealed nothing. He escorted Dumbledore to the door. After it closed, he stood in the hallway and heard Petunia moving in the kitchen, the clink of cups being washed with unnecessary thoroughness, and he allowed himself exactly 10 seconds to feel the full adrenaline of what had just happened, the way you might let yourself feel the heat of a fire you'd been holding your hands near without flinching. Then he went back to the garden and finished the weeding. The 22nd of August arrived under a sky that couldn't decide between cloud and sun and compromised on both, alternating them in bands that gave Diagon Alley a striped, slightly theatrical look as Harry walked its length with Iron Hook on one side and the newly appointed Gringotts legal advocate, a goblin named Steelfang who wore robes of such aggressive formality that she seemed to be daring the universe to find fault with her, on the other. The Wisingamot hearing chamber was not, Harry knew, typically used for civil filings. Those were handled in ministry conference rooms, in front of arbitration panels. But the combination of 3 lordship claims, a criminal matter, and a civil suit against the chief warlock himself had apparently triggered a procedural crisis of sufficient magnitude that someone had decided the full chamber was appropriate, and Harry suspected that someone had been Amelia Bones, who had a talent for ensuring that important things happened in the most visible possible way. The chamber was semicircular, with tiered seating for the 50 members of the Wizengamot and a floor area arranged around a central chair that was normally for defendants. Harry did not sit in the defendant's chair. He sat at the plaintiff's table, which had been set up to its left, alongside Steelfong and 3 Gringotts documents managers who were there to present evidence. The Wizengamot filled in around him. He recognized some faces: Augusta Longbottom, ramrod straight in the upper tier, with the magnificent hat that was her trademark, looking at Harry with an expression of concentrated attention that had no condescension in it whatsoever. Cornelius Fudge, in lime green robes, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Several members Harry recognized as Dumbledore's people, in both the political and personal sense, who were watching the plaintiff's table with varying degrees of masked alarm. Dumbledore was not present as chief warlock. He had recused himself from the presiding seat, which was procedurally required when the chief warlock was a named party, and the deputy chief warlock, a thin wizard named Ogden whom Harry vaguely remembered as being scrupulously fair, sat in his place. Dumbledore sat in his Wizengamot seat like any other member, in his purple robes, and he looked at Harry when Harry looked at him, and neither of them looked away first. Dumbledore broke his gaze to address something his legal representative murmured to him, and Harry turned back to the front. "The Wizengamot is called to order," Ogden said. "We are here to address the filings received from the office of Gringotts Wizarding Bank on behalf of Lord Harrison James Potter-Black-Peverell. The filings are as follows." He began to read. The first was the criminal matter of Sirius Black, which was not part of the civil suit but which Gringotts had filed simultaneously. Ogden read the charges: illegal imprisonment without trial, 5 years 7 months duration, representing a continuous violation of the Prisoners' Rights Act, and Harry watched the chamber. Fudge had gone slightly green. 3 of the older members were leaning together in whispered consultation. Augusta Longbottom was absolutely still. "The Ministry DMLE has confirmed," Ogden said, "that no trial record exists for Sirius Black. The Ministry has authorized emergency review pending formal proceedings. The question before this body today is whether to confirm the emergency release order." The vote was called. 31 in favor, 12 against, 7 abstentions. The emergency release was confirmed. Harry let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Second matter," Ogden said. "The civil filing against Albus Dumbledore." The chamber's noise level changed. It didn't get loud. The Wizengamot was full of people who'd spent careers controlling their public expressions, but the quality of its silence changed, became loaded and sharp. Ogden read the charges in full, in the careful cadence of official proceedings, and each charge landed in the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. Illegal assumption of magical guardianship over Lord Harrison Potter, without legal authority, without documentation, and in direct contravention of the registered will of Lord James Potter. Interference with the lawful execution of the Potter will, resulting in 5 years of mismanaged estates and denied inheritance rights. Willful placement of a minor heir in a documented environment of neglect and abuse, in violation of the Minor Heirs Protection Act of 1883. Misuse of institutional authority, specifically the authority of Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, to obstruct the legal proceedings that would have resolved the above matters. Claimed damages: 10 million galleons, plus compounding interest on mismanaged estate value. The number hung in the air. 10 million. Even here, even among people for whom galleons were not entirely theoretical, it was a very large number said out loud in a very formal room. Fudge said, audibly, "Merlin's beard." Harry stood. "Lord Potter," Ogden said, with the air of a man making peace with the extraordinariness of his day. "You may address the chamber." Harry walked to the speaking area. He was the shortest person who had ever stood there, he suspected. He looked around the chamber once, at the faces, the expressions ranging from hostile to stunned to fascinated, and then he spoke. I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't, he said. This is not a personal grudge. This is not the action of someone who is angry about their childhood, though anger would be understandable. This is a legal matter about whether institutional authority in the wizarding world operates within the law or above it. He paused. Albus Dumbledore is not a bad man. I think most of you believe that, and I think most of you are right. But good intentions are not a legal defense. They never have been, and they can't be, because a system where good intentions excuse illegal action is a system where anyone sufficiently confident in their own goodness can do anything they like. He looked at Dumbledore's seat. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression that Harry could not fully name, something between professional respect and deep, genuine pain. My parents wrote a will, Harry said. They were very clear about what they wanted for me. That will was set aside because one man decided he knew better. My godfather sat in Azkaban for 5 years because that same man decided a trial wasn't necessary. I grew up in a home that this chamber would not have approved if it had seen it, because nobody asked this chamber. He let that sit. The question today is very simple. Does the law apply to everyone, or does it only apply to people who don't already hold enough power? Because I would like an answer on record. He sat down. The chamber was very quiet. Then Augusta Longbottom stood, in the upper tier, and said in the crisp, carrying voice of a woman who had been speaking in this chamber for 30 years, I move that the civil filing be advanced to formal proceedings, with a hearing date set within 60 days. There was a second almost immediately, from a direction Harry hadn't expected, the Bones family seat, where Amelia's brother Edgar had sat before Voldemort killed him, now held by a cousin. The second was firm and quick. The motion carried 43-7. After the session, in the marble corridor outside the chamber, Augusta Longbottom crossed to Harry with the direct purposefulness of someone who did not waste steps. She was taller than he remembered from his first life, he'd only known her when she was older, and grief and stubbornness had compressed her somehow. Here, at whatever age she was now, she was formidable in a way that was purely physical. She looked down at him with the assessing eye of someone who had been watching people prove themselves in this chamber for decades. Lady Longbottom, Harry said. Lord Potter, she said. Your speech was well constructed. Slightly over-explanatory in the third paragraph, you had them before the Dumbledore reference, you didn't need to tell them what conclusion to draw. I'll take that note, Harry said. See that you do. She paused. You and I should talk. Not here. She produced a small card, which she held out with the precision of someone who did not offer their card lightly. Come to Longbottom Manor for tea. This Friday. Bring your account manager. She walked away before he could respond, which was also, he suspected, deliberate. Ironhook materialized at Harry's elbow. House Longbottom has 32 allied votes on the Wisengamot, he said, in the tone of someone providing relevant context. I know, Harry said. Lady Longbottom herself commands 8 of those through personal loyalty rather than political alliance. I know that too. I'm merely observing, Ironhook said, that your speech appears to have been effective. Harry looked around the corridor. Ministry employees were moving through it in both directions, and more than a few had slowed, or found reasons to stop near the corridor walls, in the way of people who were pretending not to watch something while watching it very carefully. He found Dumbledore in the crowd, not hard, given the silver beard and the purple robes, standing near the far wall, talking to his legal representative. As Harry watched, Dumbledore looked up, and for a moment across the length of the corridor they simply looked at each other. There was something in Dumbledore's expression that Harry had never put a name to in his first life and could now, with time and distance and the particular clarity of having died once, it was loneliness. The loneliness of someone who had been the smartest person in every room for so long that being genuinely challenged felt more like loss than threat. Harry felt something complicated about that. He was not going to let it stop him. He nodded, once. Dumbledore looked at him for another moment, then turned back to his representative. Harry turned to Steelfang. What's next? Estate meetings, Steelfong said, producing a scroll that was significantly longer than was entirely comfortable. The Potter Vault Review, the Black Estate Preliminary Audit, and the Peverell Holdings Assessment, which is going to be interesting, as no one has reviewed the Peverell Holdings in approximately 70 years and we have reason to believe the inventory is considerably more substantial than recorded. How substantial? Steelfang's expression was the goblin equivalent of gleeful. We will discuss that in a secured meeting room. Harry followed her toward the Gringotts liaison office in the ministry's lower levels and thought, with a clarity that felt like sunlight after a long grey stretch, that he was beginning to understand what it meant to have resources. Not just money. Not just legal standing. The resource of being taken seriously, of having his words carry weight, of sitting in rooms where decisions were made rather than waiting to find out what those decisions had been. He was 6 years old and he had just moved 43 members of the Wizengamot. He'd done it with words and documents and the sheer, implacable force of facts arranged in the right order. In the Peverell Vault Review that afternoon, conducted through a Gringotts secure channel by a specialist goblin named Flintlock who had actually met the previous Peverell heir and was not young, Harry sat in a leather chair that was too large for him and listened to the inventory being read and felt the deep particular satisfaction of a man who has, for the first time in his life, more tools than he has immediate use for. The Peverell Library alone contained 14 volumes that Gringotts classified as priceless, including what appeared to be an original manuscript in Ignotus Peverell's own hand, which Flintlock described in the hushed tones reserved for objects of exceptional rarity. The Peverell Holdings also included, in a sealed subvault, an envelope addressed to the Peverell Lord Who Comes After, which had been sitting there for an estimated 200 years and which Flintlock handled with extraordinary care. "I'll read that privately," Harry said. "Of course," Flintlock said. He read it in the vault, while the goblins gave him space. The parchment inside was old but preserved by the magic of the container, and the handwriting was formal and looping and faintly archaic. To the one who holds the three, it read. "I do not know your name or your time. I know only that if you have found this letter, you carry all three bloodlines in your veins, which means either the families have united in ways my descendants did not intend or circumstances have conspired in ways none of us predicted. Either way, what you carry is not merely inheritance. It is a convergence. The three gifts my brothers and I were given, or won, or built, depending on which version of the story you believe, were never meant to operate separately. When they converge in one person, they do not simply add. They change the one who holds them. I will not tell you what to expect, because I did not know myself, and my guesses would likely mislead you. I will only tell you what I told my son, the Hallows are not power. They are relationship. They change how you stand in relation to other things, to death, to truth, to the people around you. They are not weapons. Use them as weapons and you will win every battle and lose everything that mattered. I leave you the library. Use it." Ignotus Peverell. Harry sat with that for a long moment, in the cool quiet of the vault with the ancient stone around him and the sound of Gringotts' deep machinery somewhere far below. Then he folded the letter carefully, put it in the inner pocket of his robes, next to his chest, and went out to make arrangements for the rest of the day. That evening, he sat in his proper bedroom at Privet Drive, which was starting to feel, tentatively, like something approaching his, and wrote a letter to Narcissa Malfoy. He wrote it carefully, because Narcissa was careful and would notice the quality of the writing's construction as much as its content. He did not threaten, did not appeal to any loyalty she might not have, did not pretend to know her motivations. He simply laid out the political landscape as it currently stood, described the direction he intended to take it, and noted that the House of Malfoy held 2 Wizengamot seats and a number of business interests that would either benefit or suffer depending on whether the coming changes to the institutional power structure were managed intelligently or not. He closed with, "I have no interest in the sins of the fathers, and I expect none of the sins of the children. I'm interested in the future. I believe you might be also." He sent it with the hired barn owl that had become, over the past 2 weeks, something of a fixture on his windowsill. Then he wrote to Remus Lupin, which was a different kind of letter entirely. Not strategic, not formal. Just, "I know where you are. I know what you are and it doesn't matter to me in the way you probably fear it does. I know what was done to my parents and Sirius and to you. I'm fixing what I can fix. I'd like you to be part of that, if you're willing. No pressure and no conditions. He sent that one too. Then he sat in the quiet and looked at the strip of night sky through his window, the same strip he'd been watching since the first night in this room, and thought about Sirius, somewhere between Azkaban and freedom right now, in a ministry medical hold, with healers and warmth and a world that was about to discover it had wronged him. Hold on, Harry thought, at the sky, at the specific configuration of stars that had nothing to do with Sirius and everything to do with the direction of his thoughts. Almost there. Tomorrow there would be more to do. The formal proceedings needed witnesses lined up, the estate audits needed review, the Longbottom meeting on Friday needed preparation, and somewhere in the coming weeks Harry needed to start working seriously on a clemency past the basic shields he'd rebuilt from memory, because the next year was going to require mental defenses that would hold against scrutiny from people considerably more skilled than Dumbledore's gentle Friday morning probe. But tonight, the 22nd hearing was behind him, and it had gone the way he'd needed it to go, and Sirius's release was confirmed, and Augusta Longbottom had given him her card. Harry settled back against his pillow and allowed himself, carefully, to feel something that he recognized with some difficulty as hope. Not the wild desperate hope of his first life, the kind that burned and consumed and tended to get people killed. Something quieter. More architectural. The hope of someone who is building rather than running. He fell asleep to the sound of an owl landing on his windowsill with a response he'd receive in the morning, and outside the suburban darkness of Privet Drive had no idea what was growing in the bedroom of number 4, in the mind of a 6-year-old lord who had the particular advantage of knowing, with some precision, what the world was capable of, and having decided, clearly, finally, with the full weight of a second chance behind the decision, to make it capable of better. Chapter 3, Lord of Three Houses. The letter from Narcissa Malfoy arrived on a Thursday, 2 days before the Longbottom meeting, carried by a white owl so immaculate it looked like it had been cleaned specifically for the delivery. The parchment was heavy cream, the handwriting precise and angular, and it smelled faintly of something expensive that Harry associated with the manor houses of old families, beeswax and old stone and the particular mustiness of libraries that had never been modernized. Lord Potter, it read. Your letter was unexpected and, I will admit, not entirely unwelcome. The political landscape you describe is accurate. Your assessment of the direction it is moving is also accurate, which is itself somewhat remarkable given your current age, which I am told is 6. I will note for the record that I do not find age a reliable indicator of capability, having raised a child who demonstrated considerable capacity from a very early stage. I will also note that I find straightforwardness considerably preferable to the alternative, which is in increasingly short supply in current circles. I am prepared to have a conversation. Not at Malfoy Manor, the walls have ears, and several of them report to people neither of us would wish informed. There is a tea room in Diagon Alley, Florian's private dining room, which can be arranged for Wednesday next at 11. My husband need not be involved in the initial discussion. Come alone. Or as alone as a lord of 3 houses with a Gringotts attachment can manage. N.M. Harry read it twice, noted the dry humor in the last line, and thought that Narcissa Malfoy was going to be considerably more interesting to work with than he'd anticipated, which was saying something because he'd anticipated quite a lot. He wrote back confirming Wednesday. Friday arrived grey and cool, with the particular English stubbornness of summer deciding not to commit. Harry took a ministry public flow from a phone box in Little Whinging, the nearest public wizarding access point, which he'd located on his 3rd day using a locating charm he'd performed with the careful intention that sat just below the threshold of wand magic and which he'd been practicing with quiet satisfaction all week, and arrived in the Longbottom Manor parlor fireplace in a small cascade of green flames that deposited him on a hearthrug with considerably more grace than his first life flu experiences had ever managed. The parlor was exactly what a room in a house like this should be: high ceilings, family portraits with the faint animated quality of subjects who were being deliberately still because a stranger had arrived, furniture that was old and excellent and slightly intimidating. There were flowers on the windowsill. Real ones, not the enchanted variety, which Harry thought said something specific about Augusta Longbottom's relationship with ostentation. A house elf in a neat pillowcase uniform appeared, took his cloak, and led him down a corridor lined with Longbottom ancestors in ascending order of formidability, to a sitting room where Augusta was already installed with a tea service and a look that suggested she had not spent the intervening days thinking about anything other than exactly what she intended to say to him. Iron Hook, who had arrived 5 minutes earlier by a different route, was already seated and had apparently been offered biscuits, which sat untouched in front of him because goblins didn't eat in professional settings on principle. "Lord Potter," Augusta said. "Sit." Harry sat. She poured tea with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom hospitality was not warmth but protocol, which in its own way Harry found more comfortable than warmth he hadn't earned. "I've been watching the Wizengamot for 31 years, she said, without preamble. "I have seen approximately 4 speeches in that chamber that changed the direction of a vote that had already made up its mind. Your speech on the 22nd was one of them." "The chamber wasn't fully made up," Harry said. "There were at least 15 members who were genuinely undecided. I needed to give them a principle to vote on rather than a person." Augusta's eyes, sharp and dark, settled on him. "Yes. That's what I mean." She set her teacup down. "You're going to tell me how a 6-year-old formulates political strategy at that level, or you're not, and I suspect you're not, and I find I'm willing to accept that." "That's generous of you." "It is not generous. It is practical. I've raised a child who is considerably less impressive than you appear to be, and I have learned the difference between demanding explanations and getting results." Something crossed her face, not quite pain, but the shadow of it. Harry knew Frank and Alice Longbottom were in St. Mungo's right now, had been there since the end of the war, had been there through every birthday Neville had without his parents' recognition. He did not bring it up. "What do you want from House Longbottom?" "Votes on 6 specific pieces of legislation I intend to introduce over the next 3 years, Harry said. "Educational reform at Hogwarts, specifically the Dada curriculum, which has been a revolving door of incompetence for 2 decades. Werewolf rights legislation, which is currently an embarrassment. Review of the Azkaban use guidelines, specifically regarding Dementor deployment and the minimum requirements for trial before imprisonment. Inheritance law reform, specifically the provisions around minor heirs. Creature protection expansion. And a mandatory audit of the Ministry's use of emergency executive authority, which has been applied far too loosely for far too long." Augusta had been still throughout this. "That is not a small legislative agenda." "No. The werewolf legislation will cost you allies. Some. It will gain me others." "Who's drafting it?" "I'll need a legal drafter. Someone who knows Wizengamot procedure well enough to get the language right." "I was hoping you might suggest someone." The corner of Augusta's mouth moved. "Alastair Crouch Jr., before everything, he was the best drafter in the Ministry. He's gone." She picked up her teacup again. "Bertrand Selwyn. He's 78, he's semi-retired. He drafted the Blood Rights Reform Act of 1979, which was nearly perfect legislation killed by terrible timing. He will want to be asked properly." "What counts as properly?" "A letter on Potter estate parchment, formal language, a specific compliment about the Blood Rights Reform Act that demonstrates you've actually read it, and an offer of a consulting fee generous enough to be respectful but not so large it looks like a bribe." Harry made a mental note. "Done." Augusta looked at him over her cup. "The 6 pieces of legislation," she said. "In exchange for what from House Potter?" "Alliance vote on Augusta Longbottom's personal legislative priorities for the next 5 years, up to 3 measures per year. Gringotts will draw the formal alliance agreement. I have 4 priorities, not 3. For then," Harry said. "And I want a meeting every month. Here. Just the 2 of us, or with the account manager if the matters are financial. I want to know what you're doing before you do it, not read about it in the Prophet." "Agreed." Augusta set her cup down with the particular finality of someone who has concluded a satisfactory negotiation. I'll tell you something, she said, in a different register, not the formal one. Frank would have liked you. Harry looked at her. The thing in her face when she said it was the careful composure of someone carrying grief so old and so constant it had become structural. I know, he said quietly. I think I would have liked him too. She looked at him sharply, then away. Picked up a biscuit and broke it in half, which was something to do with her hands. The Pettigrew matter, she said briskly. The formal criminal investigation has been opened by the DMLE. Amelia Bones is handling it personally. If Pettigrew is found, he'll be found, Harry said. The Weasley family. Their youngest son has a pet rat named Scabbers that is approximately 12 years old and has been in the family since before Percy Weasley was born. The rat's a male. Male rats live 3 years. The math isn't complicated. Augusta's expression went through several things quickly. You know where he is. I know where he probably is. I've written to the DMLE already. They'll find him. And if the rat escapes before, then we pursue through other channels. But he won't escape. Harry considered. Probably. That's less reassuring than the rest of it. I'm working on Pettigrew, Harry said. He's not the most urgent problem. What is? Harry looked at her steadily. He had thought carefully about how much to tell Augusta Longbottom and had concluded that she was one of the people who deserved the truth, or most of it. Not because she was safe, there was no safe, but because she was Frank Longbottom's mother and she had spent 5 years watching her son and daughter-in-law breathe in a hospital bed and call it living, and she deserved to know that the people who had done that to them were not finished. Voldemort is not gone, he said. Augusta Longbottom did not flinch. She had, after all, survived the First War, survived her son's torture, survived everything the wizarding world had done to her family, and she had come out the other side with the hat and the straight spine and the 31 years in the Wizengamot. She was not the flinching kind. I suspected, she said. The nature of his power, the things I've read about the dark magic he was using, they don't simply end. They don't. He's not a threat right now. He's less than a ghost, less than a spirit. But he has means of return, and he will pursue them, and the timeline is, he paused. Several years. Maybe 5. And you intend to deal with that? Yes. With the resources of 3 houses and whatever else you're building here. And other things, Harry said. I know what he made and where most of it is. That's the advantage I have. He paused. I'd like your help with one specific element. Neville. Augusta went very still. Frank and Alice were the best Aurors of their generation, Harry said. Neville has their potential in him. He needs to be trained properly, not managed. He needs to be encouraged in the right directions early. I'd like to offer to arrange some supplementary tutoring over the next few years, with people I'll be bringing in. With your permission. The stillness in Augusta stretched until Harry could feel its weight. My grandson, she said, has thus far displayed limited magical aptitude. He hasn't been given the right circumstances to display what he actually has, Harry said. The circumstances are important. They're going to change. He held her gaze and she held his, and what passed between them in that moment was not spoken and didn't need to be. She gave one sharp nod. I'll send Selwyn's details, she said, and stood to indicate the meeting was concluded, and shook his hand with the grip of someone who made agreements infrequently and kept them absolutely. The letter from Remus Lupin had arrived while Harry was at the Longbottom meeting. He found it on his windowsill when he got home, not brought by an owl but slipped through the letterbox by hand, which meant Remus had come to Privet Drive in person and not come to the door, which was so entirely Remus that Harry had to stand in his bedroom and breathe through it for a moment. The letter was short, the handwriting neat and slightly cramped, with the particular quality of someone writing carefully when they wanted to write quickly. Harry. I have read your letter 4 times. I don't know what to say. I have not been well, these past few years. I have been making do. I heard about the Gringotts filing from a contact at the ministry and I didn't let myself think. If what you've said is true, if what's happening with Sirius is what it seems to be, then I've been living in a world that was wrong in a way I didn't know I could ask it to be fixed. I would like to meet. I'm not sure I'm not currently in a position to offer much. But I'd like to meet. RJL. Harry sat on his bed and read it twice and then wrote back, Tuesday. Diagon Alley, the Leaky Cauldron, noon. I'll buy lunch. Bring yourself, nothing else required. H. He had Wednesday for Narcissa and Tuesday for Remus, and on Monday the news broke. The Daily Prophet ran it on the front page under a headline in the largest font Harry had ever seen deployed in a wizarding newspaper, with the particular excited breathlessness of journalists who knew they were printing the story of the decade, Sirius Black, N.O. trial, N.O. conviction former Azkaban prisoner freed on emergency order ministry confirms 5 years of illegal imprisonment Dumbledore's role in question placement faces Wizengamot scrutiny below the fold, a smaller story, Boy Who. Lived files 10 million galleon suit Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, age 6, addresses Wizengamot. There was a photograph. Harry had not known it was being taken. One of the Prophet's cameras must have been in the corridor outside the chamber, and it showed him walking out of the Wizengamot with iron hook and steel fang, in his green robes with the Potter crest at his collar, and in the photograph he was looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not performing anything for anyone's benefit, and the effect, Harry thought, looking at it, was frankly alarming. He looked about 40 years old and 4.5 feet tall. The response to the Prophet's story was immediate and volcanic. Owls began arriving at Privet Drive from 9 in the morning, so many that Petunia opened the back door with an expression of resigned acceptance and let them perch in the kitchen, which meant she also made tea, and somewhere around the 4th pot and the 47th letter Harry understood that Petunia Dursley was processing the complete reconfiguration of her understanding of the nephew she'd been resenting for 5 years through the medium of kettle management, and he chose not to comment on it. The letters were from everywhere. Wizarding families whose names Harry recognized and some he didn't. 3 sitting Wizengamot members, including one who'd voted against the emergency review and appeared to be reconsidering. A Hogwarts governor. 2 professors from institutions Harry had never heard of. Several complete strangers who simply wanted to express that they were glad someone was saying what they were saying. And 1 letter, brief and formal, from the office of the Minister for Magic, requesting a meeting at Harry's earliest convenience. Fudge. Harry wrote back confirming Thursday, and added a mental note to himself to be patient with Fudge, who was not unintelligent, just primarily motivated by political survival rather than principle. That kind of person could be useful if you understood their actual priorities. Tuesday arrived and Harry took the Fleur to the Leaky Cauldron and found Remus Lupin already there, at a corner table, with a cup of tea he'd clearly been nursing for some time and an expression of someone who was not sure whether they were in the right place. The years had not been kind to Remus. He was 36, the same age he'd been in Harry's 3rd year, and he looked it in ways he hadn't in Harry's memory. A decade of poverty and isolation and a monthly condition that nobody would help him manage had hollowed him slightly, left him thinner than he should be and with a tiredness around his eyes that spoke of more than just last night's sleep. He wore robes that were clean and well-mended but old, and he had the particular quality of a man who had spent years making himself as unobtrusive as possible, in the hope that if nobody noticed him too hard, nobody would notice what he was. He saw Harry come through the flue and stood up, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the Leaky Cauldron's lunchtime noise. Harry crossed the room and sat across from him, and Remus sat back down, and there was a moment of such compressed feeling that neither of them said anything. "You look like James," Remus said, finally. "And Lily." Both at once, somehow. "So I'm told," Harry said. "How are you?" Remus made a sound that was part laugh and part something else. "That's a surprisingly difficult question." "I've been managing. The monthly difficulties," Harry said, "are going to get easier. I have someone looking into Wolfsbane. The current formula is unstable. There's a modification to the lacewing fly component that makes it considerably more effective. I'll have it to you within the month." Remus stared at him. "Also, Harry said, "I've already drafted the framework for the werewolf rights legislation. The ministry's current stance on registries and employment restrictions is both ineffective and cruel, and there are 43 Wisengamot members who've just demonstrated they're capable of voting based on principle rather than habit, so the timing is better than it's been in years." Remus stopped. Started again. "Why?" "Because your condition is a medical reality, not a moral failing, and the law should reflect that," Harry said. "And because you were my father's best friend, and you've been alone since he died, and that's not," he paused. "That shouldn't have been allowed to happen." Remus looked at him for a long time. "Serious," he said. "Is it really?" "He'll be at the formal hearing in 3 weeks, Harry said. "He's in ministry medical care right now, which from what the healer's report says is going better than expected. Harry thought about how to put this. "He's serious." He asked the medical staff for a copy of the Prophet on day 1 and spent 3 hours being furious about the Chudley Cannons League position. Remus laughed. It was a real one, startled out of him, and it changed his face completely. Tom the barman appeared and Harry ordered lunch for both of them, properly, a full meal, because Remus had the look of someone who'd been eating for function rather than pleasure for too long, and they talked for 2 hours. Not about strategy. Not about Voldemort or Horcruxes or legislation. They talked about James and Lily, which was something Harry had never had before, someone who had known his parents as people, not as symbols, who had stories about them that were funny and embarrassing and specific and real. Remus talked about James's absolute inability to accept losing at anything, not with anger but with a creative investment in alternative interpretations of what losing meant. He talked about Lily's talent for saying exactly the thing that cut most precisely through whatever performance someone was putting on and addressing the actual person underneath. Harry sat and listened and ate his lunch and felt something he could only describe as full, not with food, though the food helped, but with something he'd been hungry for without knowing the name of it. Remus, toward the end of lunch, said quietly, "You're not just a 6-year-old, are you?" "I'm exactly a 6-year-old, Harry said. "With all the legal standing and estate management that implies." "Right," Remus said, with the tone of a man choosing not to push a door that would open in its own time. "Right." He paused. "Whatever you need from me, I'm here. I'm not sure what I have to offer, but I'm here." "I know exactly what you have to offer," Harry said. "Defense against the dark arts, theory and practical, at approximately the level of someone who graduated top of his Hogwarts year and has spent 15 years since then in situations that required constant application. Wizarding world and creature knowledge that most Hogwarts professors couldn't match. And you're one of 3 people alive who knew my parents as people, not as mythology. I need all 3. He paused. "Oh, and Moony." Remus went very still. "Prong said it," Harry said simply. "Once. A long time ago. He said Moony was the best of them at keeping his head when things went wrong." The stillness lasted a beat, then broke, and Remus leaned his elbows on the table and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something considerably less composed, and Harry let it be and didn't say anything until Remus straightened again with the look of a man who had just been handed something he'd stopped expecting to receive. "Tuesday lunches," Harry said. "Every week, here. We'll start on theory next week. Practical when you're ready." "I have time," Remus said, slightly hoarsely. "I have considerable time. I'm between, I don't currently have employment." "You're going to be the primary defense tutor for the Lord of 3 Houses," Harry said. "I'd argue that's employment." Wednesday was Narcissa. The private dining room at Florian's was small, warm, decorated in the kind of tasteful minimalism that spoke of money confident enough not to perform itself, and Narcissa Malfoy was already there when Harry arrived, seated with the precise stillness of a woman who had learned years ago that her primary social weapon was composure. She was younger than Harry's main memories of her, mid-30s, with the Malfoy coloring of white blonde hair and pale complexion, and the kind of beauty that was partly structural and partly the result of never having been careless in her life. She looked at Harry when he came in and her expression moved through one cycle of adjustment before settling. "Lord Potter," she said. "Lady Malfoy," Harry said, and sat across from her. "Thank you for coming." "I was curious," she said, which from Narcissa Malfoy was a more significant admission than it sounded. "Your letter was unusual." "Unusual how?" "Most people who write to me either want something from my husband or want to present themselves as an alternative to my husband. You did neither." She picked up her teacup. "You wrote to me." "Your husband holds 2 Wisengamot seats," Harry said, "but your political instincts are considerably sharper than his, your social network is broader, and you have a personal motivation that he lacks." "And what motivation is that?" "Draco," Harry said simply. Something moved in her eyes, fast and deep, like something very large passing under still water. "My son is 3 years old." "He is. He's also going to be a Hogwarts student in 8 years, in a school that is currently being run by a man whose authority is under significant legal scrutiny and whose curriculum in defense has been functionally non-existent for a decade. He's going to grow up in a political environment that is shifting rapidly, and the alliances his father has made may become significantly less protective than they currently appear." Harry kept his voice level and informational, not threatening. "I have no hostility toward Draco. None at all. I have no hostility toward you. I have significant interest in building something that makes the wizarding world a better and safer place, and the Malfoy family's network is valuable in that project." "And in exchange," she said, "you want what exactly?" "3 things. Lucius votes with the Potter-Longbottom block on the 6 pieces of legislation I described in my letter. You use your social network to smooth the path for the werewolf rights legislation specifically, which will face the most resistance, because you know the people who will resist it and you know how to talk to them in a way that I currently cannot. And," he paused. "Draco and Neville Longbottom should know each other. They should grow up knowing each other. The future is going to require those 2 to be able to work together, and the best time to build that is now, while the political identities their families intend for them haven't fully calcified." Narcissa looked at him over her cup for a long moment. "You want to arrange playdates," she said, "between my son and the Longbottom heir. I want to prevent a 20-year blood feud that serves no one. By means of playdates." "Starting there, yes." Her expression did something that Harry was almost sure was amusement, contained and controlled but genuine. "Lord Potter," she said, "you are deeply strange." "I've been told," Harry said. "Lucius will want something more direct in return. He responds better to clear transactional logic than to," she gestured slightly, "this. Tell him that the Potter-Black voting bloc, combined with Longbottom allies, now represents 43 reliable Wisengamot votes. Tell him that the direction of legislation for the next decade is going to be set by the people in this room, and he can be inside that or outside it. That's transactional enough." Narcissa set down her cup. "He'll agree," she said. "He'll resist for form's sake and then agree, because he is, above all else, practical about where power sits." She looked at Harry with an expression that was more direct than anything she'd shown so far. "My husband has made commitments to certain interests that are not going to simply dissolve because the political winds change." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not asking him to renounce anything publicly. I'm asking him to vote correctly and stay out of the way while things are built. The rest can be addressed later. And the Dark Lord. Not active. Not a present threat. But not gone, and the preparations some people made are going to become a liability in approximately 5 years." He held her gaze. "I intend to deal with that situation. When I do, people who are clearly on the wrong side of it will find themselves in significant difficulty. People who are clearly on the right side of it will not." The statement sat between them with all its implications intact. "I see," Narcissa said, in a voice that was very controlled and very aware. "I'm not making threats," Harry said. "I'm making forecasts." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The playdates. Draco is," He is sometimes difficult with children he doesn't know. Neville is patient, Harry said. He gets it from Alice. Something crossed Narcissa's face at that, an expression that was complicated and human and not the polished surface she usually wore. She had known Alice and Frank Longbottom before the war, Harry remembered. They'd been in different houses but roughly contemporary. Whatever that memory was, she let it pass. Monthly playdates, she said. Alternating locations. I will not have Draco at Longbottom Manor until he's comfortable with the idea. Fine. And the werewolf legislation. I'll work the network. It will take time. I have time. No, she said, standing, you really don't, do you? It wasn't a question. She extended her hand, and Harry stood and shook it, and her grip was firm and brief and measured. Lord Potter. This has been, considerably more interesting than I expected. Lady Malfoy. The same. Thursday brought fudge. The Minister for Magic's office was all green and gold in the familiar way, and Fudge himself was in lime robes that clashed heroically with everything, and he greeted Harry with the excessive warmth of a politician who had been awake the night before deciding how to feel about a situation and had settled on warmly supportive as the safest available option. Lord Potter, he said, enthusiastically. Delightful to meet you, simply delightful, we've all been so, I mean to say, your speech to the Wizengamot was, Minister, Harry said pleasantly. Thank you for seeing me. I'll be brief. Of course, do sit, I'd rather stand, Harry said, which slightly derailed Fudge's choreography, but he recovered. I want to tell you directly what I told the Wizengamot, so there's no ambiguity. I'm pursuing the civil suit. I'm pursuing the legislative agenda. I'm pursuing the criminal case against Pettigrew and the formal proceedings for Sirius. None of that is negotiable and I'm not bringing it to you for approval. Fudge blinked. I see. What I am bringing to you, Harry said, is an opportunity. The Ministry has a significant liability exposure from the Sirius Black situation. The Black family estate legal team has been in contact with your solicitors, I assume. There has been, yes, there has been correspondence. The liability can be managed, if it's managed proactively, Harry said. Formal acknowledgement of the wrongful imprisonment, a ministry apology on record, and cooperation with the reform agenda I described publicly. In exchange for which I will instruct my legal team to structure any damages from the Black matter as future credited institutional reform funding rather than a direct payout, which makes your budget problem significantly more manageable and makes the minister look like a reformer rather than a defendant. Fudge stared at him with the expression of a man who was used to managing situations and had met one that was managing him instead. That is, he stopped. That is actually quite sensible. I've been told I occasionally make sense, Harry said. The Dumbledore matter is, Fudge lowered his voice, even though they were alone. Albus Dumbledore is he has a great deal of support, Lord Potter. A great deal. The public regard for him is, I know what the public regard for him is, Harry said. And the public regard for the boy who lived is probably also not insignificant, do you think? Fudge's mouth closed. I don't need the ministry to side against Dumbledore in the civil matter, Harry said. I need the ministry to stay neutral and allow the formal proceedings to operate correctly. That's all. Can you do that? Yes, Fudge said. I believe I can manage that. Wonderful, Harry said. Then we're going to get along fine. He left the minister's office on a Friday morning, walked through the atrium under the golden fountain's light, and felt the shape of the week settling around him, Augusta's alliance, Remus's presence, Narcissa's network, Fudge's grudging neutrality. 5 pieces he hadn't had a week ago. And then, on Friday afternoon, while he was reviewing estate documents in his bedroom with the focused concentration of someone turning a foreign landscape into familiar territory, an owl arrived that made every other piece of the week feel preparatory. It was from the ministry medical facility. Brief, formal, clinical in the way that ministry correspondence always was, and yet the words at its center were the most important words Harry had read in 2 lifetimes. Sirius Orion Black has completed initial medical assessment and is responding well to treatment. He is stable, coherent, and has been informed of the current legal proceedings. He has been informed that Lord Harrison Potter-Black-Peverell filed for his release, and has requested, if Lord Potter is available and willing, a meeting at the earliest convenient date. He also requests, and we quote directly, "Can someone tell Harry that I'm going to need a much better explanation than legal irregularities and also possibly a very large drink?" Harry put the letter down on his desk. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, very briefly, in a gesture he'd picked up from Remus at the Leaky Cauldron, and breathed. Outside, the summer evening was doing something reasonable for once, actually warm, the last of the day's sun coming through the window in long amber bars, lighting the dust motes and the edge of his parchment stack and the Potter crest on the small pennant Gringotts had sent as part of the formal lordship confirmation package. He picked up a quill, dipped it, and wrote back to the Ministry Medical Facility in his careful 6-year-old hand that was getting steadier every week. "Please tell Lord Black that I'll be there Saturday morning. Tell him the explanation is going to take a while. Tell him to save the drink for after. H. J.PBP." He set down the quill, and sat back, and looked at the amber evening light, and thought about Saturday with a feeling that was clean and unambiguous and warm, the anticipation of something he had been waiting for across 2 lifetimes, that had never quite arrived in the first one, that was almost here now. He had built a lot this week. He was going to keep building. But Saturday was going to be something else entirely. Saturday was going to be about a door opening that had been closed since 1981, and whatever was on the other side of it, he was going to walk through it without hesitating. He always had. Chapter 4, The Dog and the Boy. The Ministry Medical Facility smelled of healing potions and laundered linen, and underneath both of those, very faintly, the cold salt smell that Harry associated with Dementors, the residue of 5 years of proximity to creatures that fed on warmth and memory. The corridor leading to Sirius's room was ordinary enough, cream walls and enchanted lighting that mimicked a reasonable approximation of natural daylight, but that smell was there, lodged in the stonework, and Harry walked through it with his jaw set. A healer met him at the ward desk. Young, professional, with the careful manner of someone who had been dealing with an unexpectedly complicated patient. "Lord Potter," she said. He's been up since 5 in the morning. He's fine. He's just," she paused, searching for the right word. "Sirius," Harry said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had met a concept and then encountered the reality. "He rearranged all the furniture in his room before breakfast," she said. "He said the original arrangement was institutionally oppressive. He's also been doing something to the windows that technically isn't breaking any rules but that I'm fairly certain I should be concerned about." "I'll talk to him about the windows," Harry said. "Room 7, she said, and stepped aside with the air of someone handing over a problem they were genuinely glad to relinquish. Harry walked to room 7. He stood outside the door for exactly 2 seconds, not from nerves, or not only from nerves, but from the particular quality of this moment, its weight, the fact that he was 6 years old and standing outside a door and Sirius was on the other side of it and alive, actually here, and the last time Harry had seen him, he opened the door. The room had indeed been rearranged. The bed was against the far wall under the window, the chairs were pulled together near the center, and every flat surface had been covered with what appeared to be a collection of items sourced from the nursing staff, other patients, and possibly thin air, a stack of Quidditch weeklies, 3 books, a chess set that had been set up mid-game, and enough empty tea mugs to suggest that Sirius had been using caffeine as a substitute for the 12 years of social interaction he'd missed. Sirius himself was sitting on the windowsill with his legs hanging over the edge, eating what appeared to be a piece of toast as though toast was something he intended to take seriously from now on. He was thinner than Harry had ever seen him, thinner than the photograph in The Prophet in his 3rd year, thinner than the man who had come through the flu in Grimmauld Place and been immediately insufferable about everything. The Azkaban years were visible in his face, carved into it, a hollowness around his eyes and a quality to his skin that spoke of cold and darkness and 5 years of Dementor proximity. His hair was long and tangled and the grey in it was wrong. Sirius had gone grey before his time, the Dementors having extracted something that would have otherwise stayed dark for years. But his eyes were the same. Grey and sharp and absolutely, fundamentally alive, and when they landed on Harry they did something that Harry was not prepared for even though he had been prepared for this moment in the abstract. They recognized him. Not in the general way of seeing James Potter's face on a child. Sirius had looked at Harry in his third year and done that, the flash of James' grief and subsequent adjustment. This was different. This was the look of someone who saw Harry specifically, individual, the actual person standing in the doorway, and responded to that person with the full force of something that had been holding itself together on stubbornness and spite and toast for 5 years. "Harry," Sirius said. It came out rough, like a voice that hadn't been used for conversation in too long and was reminding itself of the shapes. But it was warm. It was the warmest thing Harry had heard in 2 lifetimes and it hit him in the chest like a physical impact. "Hey," Harry said. Sirius swung his legs off the windowsill and stood, and for a moment he just stood there in the clinical light of the room, looking at Harry in the doorway, and they were both quite still. Then Sirius crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched down to Harry's level and put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at his face very carefully, not just the James resemblance, not just the lily eyes, but looking at him, specifically, the way someone looks when they're making sure something is real. "You," Sirius said, "are very small." "Everyone keeps mentioning that," Harry said, and his voice came out slightly unsteady, which he attributed to the healer's corridor and the potion's smell and not to anything else. "You filed the paperwork," Sirius said. "All of it. The inheritance claim, the release filing, Harry, you filed a 10 million galleon lawsuit. Against Dumbledore, yes. You are 6. The healer said the same thing. Sirius looked at him for another moment. Then he pulled Harry into a hug that was fierce and somewhat overwhelming and smelled of hospital soap and underneath that of something that Harry associated with Grimmauld Place and fire whiskey and the particular kind of love that comes from someone who hasn't had anyone to give it to for a very long time and has therefore been accumulating it at considerable pressure. Harry hugged him back, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and the healing potion smell faded somewhat, and the room was very quiet except for the enchanted lighting's faint hum. "You're all right," Sirius said, against the top of his head. It sounded like the conclusion to a conversation he'd been having with himself. "Better now," Harry said. Sirius pulled back, hands still on Harry's shoulders, and looked at him with an expression that was assembling itself from several complicated components. The grief for James and Lily was there, always there, but it was familiar grief, the kind that had been carried long enough to be managed. The fury at the Dementors and the years and Pettigrew was there too, hot and barely banked. And underneath both of those was something more fragile and more fierce that Harry recognized because it was the same thing he'd seen in Remus's face at the leaky cauldron, the expression of someone who had stopped expecting good things and been ambushed by one. "Tell me everything," Sirius said. "That's going to take a while." "I have time," Sirius said, straightening up. "I have absolutely nothing but time and the chess set I borrowed from the wizard in room 12, who is recovering from an engorgement charm incident and is in no condition to play anyway." He gestured at the chairs. "Sit. I'll make tea. The nursing staff have figured out that if I have something to do with my hands I'm less likely to rearrange the furniture." Harry sat, and Sirius made tea with the focused pleasure of a man for whom small domestic rituals had been stripped away and were now being reclaimed 1 cup at a time, and Harry told him. Not everything, not the full truth of what he was, the memories, the previous life. He couldn't do that, not yet, not until he understood what Sirius could hold. He told him the pieces that were explicable without that context, the Gringotts letter, the inheritance ritual, the will records, the ministry filing, the Wisingamot hearing. He told him about Remus, about Augusta, about Narcissa, about Fudge. He kept his voice level and informational, but he watched Sirius's face through all of it. Sirius sat with his tea and listened, and his expression moved through several distinct phases. Shock at the scale of it. A particular kind of fury when Harry described the will, the specific, personal fury of someone who had trusted a system that had then erased him. Complicated emotion at the Remus section that Sirius dealt with by standing up and walking to the window and staring at the enchanted sky for about 45 seconds before sitting back down. Amusement, genuine and startled, at the fudge section. When Harry finished, Sirius sat for a moment with his empty cup. "You did all of this," he said. "In 3 weeks." "The timing was right," Harry said. "The legal grounds were solid. Gringotts had institutional motivation to help. And," he paused. "It needed doing." "It needed doing," Sirius repeated, slowly, like he was testing the phrase against something. "You're 6 years old and you walked into the ministry and told them they were wrong and made them agree with you. 43 of them agreed with me. 7 didn't." "I'm going to be honest with you," Sirius said, leaning back in his chair with the particular sprawling ease that Harry remembered, a posture that said I am comfortable in all situations, which was partly genuine and partly armor. "I'm going to find the explanation for how you know all of this extremely interesting. And I'm also going to not ask you for it right now, because right now he stopped. "I'm still finding my feet. The world outside my head is," he made a gesture that encompassed the room, the corridor, the ministry above them, everything. "Loud. There's a lot of it." "I know," Harry said. "Take your time." James would have, Sirius started, and stopped, and started again. James would have loved this. The lawsuit. The Wisengamot speech. He'd have been absolutely insufferable about it, he'd have told everyone, he stopped again. Harry waited. "He'd have been so proud of you," Sirius said, quietly. "Both of them. Lily would have made you explain the legal citations to her in full before congratulating you because she'd have wanted to be sure you had all the right precedents, and then she'd have made you something ridiculous to eat and told everyone in earshot." He looked at Harry directly. "I want to be that for you. I know I know this isn't what a guardian is supposed to look like. I'm skinny and I've been in Azkaban for 5 years and I can't go outside yet and I have approximately 15 sane hours a day before the Dementor residue kicks in and the nightmares start. But I want to be what they would have been, if I can." "You don't have to be what they would have been," Harry said. "You just have to be you." Sirius looked at him. "You're already more than enough," Harry said. "You were always more than enough. It just took me a while to tell you." The silence that followed that was its own kind of full. Sirius cleared his throat, looked at the ceiling, made a face that indicated he was dealing with something in the privacy of his own chest and would not be discussing it further, and then said, "All right. The chess set. Do you play?" "I play," Harry said. "How well?" "I'll beat you in 11 moves." Sirius looked at him with sudden sharp interest. "Is that a challenge?" "It's a forecast," Harry said. "But I'm open to being wrong." He was wrong. It took 16 moves. Sirius, it turned out, had spent 5 years in Azkaban playing chess against himself in his head, which had produced a player of alarming creativity and zero conventional strategy, and Harry had to entirely reorganize his approach on the fly to account for moves that no sane opponent would make because they looked like tactical disasters and turned out to be something else entirely. "You," Harry said, "at move 14, play chess the way a caffeinated cat would." "I take that as a compliment," Sirius said, moving a bishop to a square that made no immediate sense and watching Harry's face with gleeful attention. "It was a description, not a compliment. I've reclassified it." Harry won anyway, but it took concentration, and when it was over Sirius was grinning in a way that rearranged his face from the gaunt, tired thing it had been at the window into something much closer to what Harry imagined he'd looked like at 20, before everything. "Tomorrow," Sirius said. "Same time." "I'll bring better biscuits," Harry said. "The hospital ones are terrible." "They're not terrible, they're just, okay, they're terrible." "Yes. Bring biscuits." Harry was nearly at the door when Sirius said, "Harry." He turned. "Thank you," Sirius said. Plain and direct, none of the deflection. For coming for me. Harry looked at him. I should have come sooner, he said. It was true, and it wasn't entirely explicable within the parameters of this conversation, and Sirius heard the weight of it and let it be without pulling at the threads. You're here now, Sirius said. Yeah, Harry said. I am. He went back on Sunday. And Monday. And every day after that for the 2 weeks while the formal proceedings were being prepared, and Sirius got incrementally more substantial, physically, as the healer's potions worked and proper food compounded and sleep in a room without dementors became a thing, and the chess games became longer and more complex and more genuinely competitive, and Harry began bringing books from the Potter estate library that he thought Sirius would want to read, and Sirius began asking questions about the legislative agenda and the Wisengamot in the sharpening way of a man whose mind had been locked in a cell for 5 years and was stretching itself back out. On day 9, Remus came. Harry had not arranged it, had mentioned to Remus, carefully, that Sirius was in the medical facility and was allowed visitors and had left the rest alone, because some doors you couldn't open for other people. Remus had arrived on his own on a Tuesday morning, half an hour before Harry, and when Harry came in from the corridor he found them both in the rearranged room, Sirius on the bed and Remus in one of the chairs, not talking, just sitting in the kind of silence that only exists between people who have been through too much together and don't need noise to confirm each other's presence. Harry put the biscuits he'd brought on the desk and pulled up a chair and sat, and the three of them were quiet for a moment. Well, Sirius said eventually. This is the most people I've been in a room with in 5 years. How is it? Remus asked. Sirius considered this with genuine attention. Loud, he said. And also exactly right. Remus exhaled, slow and careful, and something in the set of his shoulders changed. The chess set, Harry said. Remus, do you play? Badly, Remus said. Good, Sirius said. Harry keeps winning. I need someone he can beat while I watch. That's a terrible reason to include me. I have several good reasons to include you, Sirius said, and his voice had dropped a register into something quieter and more serious. Mooney. 5 years. I know, Remus said. I should have, I thought about, Sirius stopped, dragged a hand through his hair. Azkaban doesn't leave you a lot of room for regretting the things you didn't do. It mostly just takes whatever it wants. But somewhere in the back of it I kept thinking I'd never. I'm here, Remus said. We're both here. Yeah, Sirius said. We are. The formal trial proceedings for Sirius's case were held on the 15th of September, in the Wisengamot chamber, before a full panel. Harry sat in the observer section with Iron Hook and watched, because Steel Fong had argued correctly that his presence at the plaintiff's table was not necessary for this one. Sirius had his own legal representation, funded by the Black estate, and what was needed was proper process, not additional advocacy. The ministry presented the evidence, which was straightforward and damning. No trial record. No conviction record. 12 violations of the Prisoners' Rights Act confirmed. The Pettigrew investigation was ongoing. They hadn't found him yet, but the groundwork was laid, and the ministry had opted to address the illegal imprisonment charge separately from the question of Sirius's guilt or innocence, because the illegal imprisonment was independently actionable. The verdict on the matter of unlawful imprisonment took the panel 40 minutes to reach, unanimous. The ministry's formal apology was read into the record in the stiff, somewhat agonized prose of an institution acknowledging that it had been wrong without actually wanting to say so in plain language. Sirius was cleared of all charges pending the outcome of the Pettigrew investigation, which as a matter of law meant he was a free man with no criminal record, and the question of compensation for 5 years of wrongful imprisonment was referred to a separate civil process that Gringotts was already prepared to pursue. Harry watched Sirius's face when the verdict was read. He had been braced for emotion, had thought he knew what it would look like. Sirius was theatrical, was expressive, wore his feelings close to the surface in most circumstances. But the expression on Sirius's face when Ogden said cleared was nothing theatrical. It was very small and very real, the kind of expression that lives beneath all the performances, something at the hinge of his jaw going slightly loose, and the breath going out of him, and the subsequent stillness of a man who has just put down something too heavy to have been carrying. Remus, seated beside Harry in the observer section, put his hand briefly over his mouth and looked at the ceiling. Harry looked at the front of his legal folder and counted his own heartbeats until he was sure his voice would work. Sirius was formally discharged from the Ministry Medical Facility 2 days after the verdict. Harry was there for that too, in the facility lobby with Iron Hook and Remus and a small suitcase of items Sirius had been accumulating over the 3 weeks, mostly books, a few personal effects retrieved from the Black Estate inventory, and an entirely unreasonable number of chess pieces that had migrated from the recreation room. Sirius came out of the lift in the clothes the healers had sourced for him, normal wizarding wear, nothing special, but clean and properly fitting, and he crossed the lobby and stopped in the middle of it and simply stood there for a moment, in the space and the light, and looked at the ordinary lobby of a ministry building as if it were the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Potter Manor," Harry said. "It needs work, but it's habitable and the wards are the strongest in Britain." Sirius looked at him. "James's, ours," Harry said. "If you want it." Sirius's expression did the thing again, the thing where all the performance cleared away. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, all right." Potter Manor was in Wiltshire, at the end of a long drive that was currently more weeds than gravel, behind wards that recognized Harry immediately and had needed considerable reactivation work from Gringotts ward specialists over the previous 2 weeks. It was a proper country house, old stone, mullioned windows, a kitchen garden that had gone largely wild, and inside, the particular melancholy of a house that had been sealed for 5 years. But it was soundly built, the magic in the walls was as old and solid as any Harry had felt, and the Potter Library occupied an entire wing and was, as he'd suspected, extraordinary. Sirius walked through it room by room on that first day, touching things carefully, a photograph on a side table, a quill on a desk, a set of Quidditch memorabilia in one of the upstairs rooms that had been James's. He was quiet in a way that Harry understood was not sadness exactly but the particular process of a person who had been separated from their life and was now slowly, carefully, reassembling its texture. Harry let him have the space for it. He set up in the library with the afternoon's reading. He was working through the Potter Estate's collection systematically, starting with magical theory and working outward, and there were things in there that he was fairly certain nobody had published in the last 50 years. Remus had come with them. He occupied the kitchen with the comfortable competence of someone who genuinely liked cooking and was not going to pretend otherwise, and by early evening there were sounds and smells coming from the kitchen that made the house feel occupied in a way Harry hadn't realized he'd been missing. At dinner, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table. Harry had suggested the dining room and been vetoed by both Sirius and Remus simultaneously, which he took as a positive indicator, and ate proper food and talked, and it was nothing dramatic. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, 3 people at a table, and it was also the thing Harry had never had and had spent his first life understanding he was missing without ever quite being able to name the shape of what wasn't there. "The Peverell Library materials," Harry said, over what Remus had done to a chicken that was frankly impressive. "The goblin at Gringotts, Flintlock, he's been working through the inventory. There are 14 volumes classified priceless, and 6 of them relate to ward magic that predates the current standard theory by about 3 centuries. How's that relevant?" Sirius asked, with the focused attention he brought to anything that involved practical magic. "The wards on this house are 17th century, Harry said. "Good, but not at the ceiling of what's possible. The Peverell materials include ward designs they're conceptually different. They don't just exclude, they adapt. They respond to intent, not just identity." Sirius leaned forward. "Like the Fidelius, but more elegant," Harry said. "Less dependent on a single point of failure." "You're rebuilding the wards," Sirius said. "I'm planning to, yes." Sirius and Remus exchanged a look that Harry caught, the look of 2 people who have been friends long enough to conduct full conversations without words. "You're preparing for something," Sirius said. "Not accusatory. Just direct." Harry considered the table for a moment. Then he looked up. Voldemort isn't gone, he said, and watched both of them absorb that. Whatever he is, he's not dead. He has a way back and he's going to pursue it, and we have approximately 4 to 5 years before that becomes a present crisis. I know what he made to anchor himself. I know where most of it is. I intend to deal with it before he has a chance to use it. Sirius sat very still. I know it's a lot, Harry said. You've just gotten out. You don't have to, absolutely not, Sirius said. Harry blinked. Don't finish that sentence, Sirius said. Don't tell me I don't have to be involved. I was your father's best friend. I was going to be your godfather in the actual functional sense before everything went wrong. Whatever's coming, I'm in it. He looked at Remus. Moony. Obviously, Remus said, as if this were the simplest thing in the world. I just wanted to be clear, Sirius said, to Harry, that whatever you're building and however you're doing it, you're not doing it alone. That's not negotiable. Harry looked at them both. Something in his chest that had been carrying weight without his noticing shifted, just slightly, toward easier. All right, he said. Good, Sirius said. Now tell me about Voldemort's anchors, because I have questions, and then I want to hear about Narcissa Malfoy because that's the part of Remus's recap that I found the most, what's the word, creatively surprising. Strategically sensible, Harry said. That is not the word I used, Remus said. Unprecedented, Sirius said. That was my word. You've arranged playdates between Draco Malfoy and Neville Longbottom. Neville needs the social practice and Draco needs to not grow up to be his father, is what Draco needs, Sirius said, with the direct familial frankness of someone who was technically Draco's relative twice over. Which, fair enough. The Malfoy line isn't beyond salvage. Lucius is a committed coward with excellent instincts for self-preservation, which means if the wind is blowing the right direction he'll go with it. He paused. Narcissa is considerably more than that. She is, Harry agreed. She sent me a letter, Sirius said, which surprised Harry. Through the estate. While I was still in the facility. It was, he paused. Formal. But she said she was glad I was out. I think, for Narcissa, that was approximately equivalent to weeping with joy. The Black family is complicated, Remus said. The Black family is a disaster with nice wallpaper, Sirius said. Present company excluded. And possibly Andromeda. How is Andromeda? I haven't contacted Andromeda yet, Harry said. It's on the list. She's going to love you, Sirius said. She's going to immediately see through whatever you're doing and love you for it anyway. He looked at Harry with the expression he'd been developing over the past 2 weeks, the one that was working out what Harry was and how to hold that. What else is on the list? The civil trial preparation, Harry said. The Pettigrew situation, the DMLE are pursuing it but slowly. The estate ward rebuild. The Wolfsbane modification, Remus, the lacewing fly adjustment I mentioned, I need to find someone to test the formula because the theory is solid but chemistry needs empirical. I'll manage that, Remus said, without inflection. The legislation drafting, I have a meeting with Selwyn next week. And, Harry paused. Horcrux research. I need access to the kinds of dark magic texts that explain what they are and how to deal with them. The Peverell Library might have something, but I also need, Black Library, Sirius said immediately. Grimmauld Place. The library there is, it's dark, a lot of it, the kind of dark that makes you need a bath afterward. But if there's anything in Britain on Horcrux methodology and countermeasures, it'll be in that library. He paused. I haven't been back there. You don't have to go, Harry said. I can go with the Gringotts representative. No, Sirius said, with the decisiveness of someone making a choice before they've finished deciding it. No, I'll go. I'll go with you. He looked at the table, then up. It's a house. It's a house that belonged to people who treated me like furniture, but it's a house. I've spent 5 years in Azkaban. I can manage a house. Next week, Harry said. Next week, Sirius agreed. After dinner, while Remus was doing the washing up over Sirius's protests that the washing up was what magic was for, Harry sat in the library with a cup of tea and the Potter-Black-Peverell letter, which he'd read 3 more times since the vault, and he thought about what it said. They are not weapons. Use them as weapons and you will win every battle and lose everything that mattered. He thought about the stone, which was in a ring in a ruined house in Little Hangleton. He thought about the wand, which was in Dumbledore's hand. He thought about the cloak, which was in a vault somewhere, the Potter vault, the one item of his father's estate that Dumbledore had apparently had the conscience not to keep for himself. He thought about what Ignotus had meant, about relationship rather than power. He thought about what it felt like to sit in the kitchen at Potter Manor with Sirius and Remus and eat dinner. He thought that perhaps Ignotus had been right, and that the Hallows were less about what you could do with them and more about what you could be with them, what they said about the person who had them and what that person chose. Sirius appeared in the library doorway. He had a book under one arm and a second cup of tea in his hand and the expression of someone who was absolutely, completely not going to admit that they were checking to see if someone was still there. "What are you reading?" he asked. "Old letter," Harry said. "Sit down." Sirius sat, and opened his book, and the library was quiet around them with the particular living quiet of old rooms with full shelves, and outside the windows Potter Manor's grounds were going dark under an early autumn sky, and in the kitchen Remus was singing something quietly and badly while he finished the washing up. It was, Harry thought, the closest thing he had ever felt to home. He was not going to be sentimental about it. He had too much to do, too much at stake, too much still ahead of him, the civil trial, the Horcruxes, 5 years of preparation for a war he intended to end before it properly started. But he sat in the library with Sirius reading 3 feet away and Remus's voice just audible from the kitchen, and he let himself have it, this moment, this ordinary extraordinary thing, without immediately turning it into strategy. Tomorrow he would plan. Tomorrow the list would resume and the work would continue and the pieces would keep moving. Tonight, the fire was warm and the library was full and the people he loved were here, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Harry Potter was not alone. Outside, September moved quietly through the Wiltshire countryside, and the old wards of Potter Manor hummed their low familiar note, and the house that had been sealed and cold and waiting for 5 years was, room by room, breath by breath, coming back to life. Chapter 5. The weight of old magic Grimmauld Place revealed itself the way it always had, a sullen expansion between numbers 11 and 13, the kind of appearance that suggested the house had been somewhere else and had returned reluctantly. The iron railings were corroded and the front steps were green with damp and the knocker was a twisted serpent that looked like it had opinions about visitors. Sirius stood on the pavement outside it with his hands in his pockets and looked at the house for a long moment without speaking. Harry stood beside him and said nothing. Remus was on his other side, which Harry suspected was deliberate positioning. "Right," Sirius said eventually. "It's a house." "It's a house," Remus agreed. "A house full of dark artifacts and portraits of my relatives who will attempt to make me feel bad about my life choices." "We can take the portraits down," Harry said. "Starting with my mother," Sirius said. "First order of business. I don't care if she's been charmed to the wall since 1780, she's coming down." "Gringotts brought a specialist," Harry said. "She's already inside." Sirius glanced at him. "You arranged a portrait removal specialist." "I arranged several things," Harry said. "The specialist, a full dark artifacts inventory team, and a structural ward assessment. I thought we'd be less distracted if the immediate irritants were managed before we got to the library." Sirius looked at the house, then at Harry, then at the house again. "You know what your father would have done if his 6-year-old ward showed up and had already arranged everything before he could even open the front door?" "Been impressed?" Harry said. "Been absolutely unbearable about it for the next month," Sirius said. "He'd have told everyone. He'd have sent an owl to every marauder," We'd all have gotten a letter that said essentially, my child managed things better than me, and he'd have been so proud it would have been genuinely nauseating. He looked back at the house. Right. Let's go in. The inside of Grimmauld Place was everything Harry remembered and slightly worse, the heads of house elves on the wall, the general atmosphere of a building that had been used by people who enjoyed grimness as an aesthetic, the dark wallpaper that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Gringotts specialist, a brisk goblin named Copperstone, had already begun on the portrait of Walburga Black and was consulting notes with the focused efficiency of someone who found magical removal puzzles professionally satisfying. Sirius walked past the portrait without looking at it, which Harry noted was a conscious act of will and respected accordingly. The library was on the second floor, behind a door that had 3 separate locking charms, a repelling jinx, and something older underneath all of that, a ward that ran on blood recognition and had simply been waiting, apparently, for someone in the black line to turn up and open it. The door opened for Sirius like it knew him. Which it did. "Merlin," Sirius said quietly, from the doorway. The Black Library was nothing like the Potter Library. The Potter Library was a scholar's collection, organized, catalogued, the accumulation of people who read for pleasure and knowledge both. The Black Library was a weapons cache. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of volumes in black and green leather, most of them warded, several of them chained, and the air inside carrying the thick, slightly sweet smell of very old dark magic, the kind that had been practiced in this room over generations and left traces in the ambient atmosphere the way cooking smells left traces in kitchen walls. Harry stepped past Sirius into the room and felt the magic settle around him, not hostile, not welcoming, just present, the way very old magic was. The Peverell blood in him registered with something in the room and there was a faint, barely audible hum. "You noticed that," Remus said, behind him. "The room noticed me," Harry said. "The Black Line has Peverell ancestry going back about 6 generations. The library has warding on it that responds to that lineage." He ran his fingers along the nearest shelf, feeling the ward structures. "It's not dangerous. It's just old." Sirius had come in and was looking at the shelves with the expression of someone who had grown up in this room and learned to read in it and hated what had been put in front of him and had done it anyway. "I know where the dark theory section is," he said. "My mother made me memorize the catalog when I was 8. She thought it was," he stopped. "She thought it was important." "Can you find anything on soul magic?" Harry asked. "Specifically the theory of soul fracture and anchoring." Sirius moved down the shelves with the muscle memory of someone who had spent years in this room and would rather not think about what that meant. He pulled 3 volumes without hesitation, heavy things, one of them chained and one of them pulsing with a ward that made the air around it feel slightly wrong. "That one," Harry said, pointing to the chained one. "That one is called Anima Cindir, which is Latin for something you don't want to read at breakfast," Sirius said. "My grandfather had it chained because even he thought it was beyond the pale, which given everything my grandfather thought was normal is saying something." "Do we have a ward removal specialist for books?" Harry asked. Ironhook's voice came from the doorway, where he had appeared with the quiet inevitability of an account manager who was always precisely where needed. "We do. Flintlock has experience with cursed texts." "Get him," Harry said. While Flintlock was being retrieved, Harry worked through the 2 unchained volumes at the library table. They were dense and required careful reading, the kind of archaic magical theory that didn't use the same conceptual vocabulary as modern texts and expected the reader to supply significant context. But the theory of soul fracture was there, laid out in the cold analytical prose of someone who had understood what they were describing and had no particular moral objection to it. Harry read for an hour, making notes, while Sirius and Remus worked through the rest of the shelf pulling relevant volumes and Flintlock addressed the chained text with the professional concentration of someone diffusing something they had absolute confidence in being able to diffuse. The chained text, when it finally opened, was worse than the others. The prose was older, the conceptual framework darker, and whoever had written it had not been writing for an academic audience. It was a practitioner's text, written by someone who had actually done what it described. Harry read it anyway, because knowledge was knowledge and he needed all of it. He found what he needed in the third chapter. The theoretical framework for destroying a Horcrux was there, not in the comforting language of something that could be undone neatly, but in the raw practical terms of what it actually involved. The soul fragment in a Horcrux was not a complete thing. It was a shard, unstable by nature, held in place by the anchoring object. Destroy the anchor and the fragment dissolved. But the destruction of the anchor had to be total, it had to reach the magical core of the object, not just its physical form. He already knew most of this. What the text gave him that he hadn't had before was the theory behind basilisk venom as a destroyer. It wasn't the only method, as he'd sometimes suspected. The text listed several: fiend fire, basilisk venom, and, most interestingly, a third method the text described as dissolution by counter-resonance, which was the application of sufficiently pure creative magic to the anchoring object. Not destructive magic. Creative. The soul was a creative act, the text argued, life making life. To undo its fracture was not a matter of destruction but of restoration, of bringing enough wholeness into contact with the incomplete fragment that it could not sustain its anchored state. Harry sat with that for a long time. "You've gone quiet," Sirius said, from across the table. "Thinking," Harry said. "About? Whether the Hallows have something to do with this." Remus looked up from his own volume. "The Deathly Hallows. Ignotus Peverell wrote that they're not power, they're relationship. That they change how you stand in relation to things." Harry looked at his notes. "The stone communicates with those who've passed beyond. The wand is the most powerful tool of magical will ever created. The cloak makes you invisible to death itself." He tapped his pen on the parchment. 3 different relationships with mortality. And if Horcruxes are about the corruption of that relationship, using death to escape death, using murder to anchor life, then the Hallows might be the countermeasure not as weapons but as the corrective principle. "That's," Remus said carefully, "very advanced theoretical magical thinking." "The text supports it," Harry said, and slid the relevant page across. Remus read it. His expression moved through professional assessment into something more open, the expression of a scholar encountering an idea with genuine structural elegance. "The counter-resonance method," he said. "This is what you're working toward." "I want to understand it fully before I try anything," Harry said. "But yes." Sirius had been looking between them. "In plain language," he said, "you're saying that instead of destroying the Horcruxes with basilisk venom or fiend fire, both of which are dangerous, uncontrolled, and in the case of fiend fire genuinely catastrophic," Harry said, "you might be able to use the Hallows as a restoration instrument." "In theory." "In theory," Sirius repeated. "Right. So we need the Hallows." "I have the cloak," Harry said. "It's in the Potter vault. The wand is with Dumbledore." "He's not going to just hand over the Elder Wand," Remus said. "No," Harry agreed. "But that's a later problem. The stone is in a ring in Little Hangleton, inside a house that was the Gaunt family home. The ring has a curse on it that would kill anyone who put it on. I need to deal with the stone without touching the ring." He looked at Sirius. "I need the curse-breaking theory. Does the Black Library have Gaunt family magic?" "The Gaunts were Slytherin's descendants, and the Blacks had dealings with, there's a correspondence archive," Sirius said. "Bottom shelf, the locked drawers. I don't have a key but, blood lock," Harry said. He reached across and picked up the small knife Flintlock had left on the table. He pressed his thumb against it without ceremony and touched the lock. The drawer opened. Sirius watched this with an expression that was trying very hard to be normal. "You're very matter-of-fact about that." "It's practical," Harry said, pulling out the correspondence archive. "Being squeamish about it doesn't help." "Right. No. Absolutely." Sirius looked at the ceiling briefly. "James, if you're watching, your son is conducting himself with considerably more equanimity than you managed at any point in your actual life. I want that noted for the record." Sirius, Remus said, without looking up from his book. Just making a formal statement. Read your book. They spent the full day in the Black Library and came home with 17 volumes, 6 rolls of notes, and more questions than answers, which Harry had expected and was comfortable with. The gap between knowing something was possible and knowing how to do it was where the real work lived, and he was used to real work. That evening he sat in the Potter library with the cloak. He'd retrieved it from the vault on Friday, the Gringotts cart descent to vault 687 with Ironhook, who had clearly done this many times but still managed to convey slight professional distaste for the speed, and the vault door opening to reveal the accumulated wealth of 3 families plus one extremely fine silvery cloth folded on a stone shelf like it wasn't one of 3 objects of genuine mythological significance. It had felt, when he picked it up, exactly as he remembered. Light in his hands, with that peculiar fluid quality, and when he draped it over himself the sensation of disappearing was the same, not darkness, just absence. He sat with it in his lap now, undraped, and thought about what Ignotus had written. Relationship with death. The cloak didn't just hide you from people. It hid you from death itself, which in the cosmological framework of the Hallows meant something quite specific, that death as a force, a presence, something with agency in the world, could not track or follow or reach someone beneath it. It was not immortality. It was not cheating death. It was the ability to move through the world at your own pace, in your own time, without that particular pressure bearing down on you. Harry had worn it his whole first life and never understood it that way. He had worn it to hide, because hiding was what he'd needed. But the cloak wasn't about hiding. It was about choosing the terms of your own encounter with mortality. He folded it carefully, put it back on the shelf he'd designated for it, and went to find Sirius. Sirius was in the sitting room with a Quidditch magazine and the expression of a man who was still relearning how to be in rooms without walls. He looked up when Harry came in. "Question," Harry said. "Ask." "When you and my father were working on the Animagus transformation. The theory work, before the practical. Did you find anything about how the transformation interacts with magical lineage?" Sirius set down the magazine with the focused look he got when someone asked him about magic he'd done himself rather than magic from a book. "Interacts how?" "Whether lineage affects the form," Harry said. "Whether a particularly strong magical inheritance influences the animal." "Prongs was a stag," Sirius said. "Which, James was very smug about that, by the way, very stately and noble, and he absolutely deserved every piece of leg pulling he got over it. Wormtail was a rat, which," he paused. "Which in retrospect was extremely informative and none of us read it correctly. I'm a dog. Lily always said it was perfectly appropriate because I had the instincts of one and the attention span." He paused. "Which was also meant as criticism, but I choose to take it as a compliment. Do you think the form is chosen or revealed?" "Revealed," Sirius said immediately. "You don't choose it. You do the work and the work shows you what's already true about you. James always thought he'd be something fast, a hawk or a," he smiled briefly. "But he was a stag. Ancient magic, old blood. Of course he was a stag." Harry thought about that. He had known, in his first life, that his Patronus was a stag, which suggested something about what his animagus form might have been if he'd ever pursued it. He had not pursued it. He had been too busy surviving to pursue things for their own sake. "What are you thinking?" Sirius asked. "That I want to learn the animagus transformation," Harry said. "And that I want to understand my Patronus first, because I think they're related." "You can cast a Patronus?" Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. "You're 6. "I've cast it before," Harry said, which was technically true and entirely uninformative. Sirius opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "What form?" "Stag." A long pause. "Right," Sirius said very quietly. "Of course it is. He looked at Harry with the particular expression that had been developing over the past weeks, the one that held multiple layers of response to the inexplicable reality of who Harry appeared to be. "I'll teach you the theory. Remus can help with the practical foundations, he knows animal magical theory better than anyone I know. The actual transformation is going to take, for most people it takes years." "I know," Harry said. "I'm starting now." "You want to be a stag." "I want to know what I am," Harry said. "There's a difference." Sirius looked at him for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "There is." The civil trial preparation entered its intense phase in October. Steele Fong had assembled a legal case of formidable precision, 47 separate documents, testimony from 12 witnesses including Amelia Bones herself, and an expert assessment from a child welfare specialist at St. Mungo's who had examined Harry and produced a report that was clinical and devastating in approximately equal measure. Dumbledore's legal team had filed a defense that Harry found professionally interesting. It did not contest the facts were in too many records to contest. It argued intent, that every decision Dumbledore had made had been in service of the greater protection of Harry and of the wizarding world, and that the unconventional measures taken were proportionate to the unconventional nature of the threat. The greater good, dressed up in legal language. Harry had expected this and had prepared for it. He sat across from Steele Fong at the Potter Manor library table and went through the defense filing point by point, and where they contested he made notes, and where they had weaknesses he marked them, and when he was done he had a list of 17 specific countermeasures to be woven into the prosecution's closing position. "The intent defense is credible," Steele Fong said, with the directness Harry valued in her. "Dumbledore is genuinely well regarded. The public narrative around him is sympathetic. This will influence the Wisengamot. The intent defense requires that the intent justifies the action," Harry said. "Good intentions do not constitute guardianship authorization under the Noble Houses Act. They never have. The court doesn't ask whether Dumbledore meant well. It asks whether he had the legal authority to act as he did, and the answer to that question is in the records." He tapped the will document. "It has always been in the records. The damages figure will be contested aggressively. 10 million is defensible and Ironhook will defend it," Harry said. "The estate mismanagement compound interest alone is 4 million over 5 years. The rest is precedent-setting. The size of the damages is the point, it needs to be large enough that the next person who considers overriding legal process thinks twice." Steele Fong made a note. "I want to address the chamber myself," Harry said. Closing statement. Steele Fong paused. "That is unusual." "I addressed them in August and it worked," Harry said. "I know what this chamber responds to and I know what I want to say. I want to say it myself." She looked at him with the goblin equivalent of careful assessment. "I will be present and prepared to intervene if the proceedings become legally complex." "Of course," Harry said. The night before the trial, Harry couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, anxiety was not quite what was keeping him awake. It was something more like the particular restlessness of having worked very hard towards something and being now on its threshold, with nothing left to do but arrive. He walked the manor at 2 in the morning, which he had not done since the first weeks, and the house moved around him in the way old houses did at night, settling and breathing, the particular language of old stone. He ended up in the library, which was where he usually ended up, and sat in the chair by the window and looked at the Wiltshire dark outside. Sirius found him there at 3. He didn't say anything when he came in, just put 2 cups of tea on the side table and sat in the other chair and pulled his knees up and looked at the dark outside too. "Tomorrow," Sirius said, after a while. "Tomorrow," Harry agreed. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about this. "Like I'm about to do something that can't be undone," he said. "Not in a bad way. Just, certain things, once they're in motion, change the landscape permanently. This is one of them." "Dumbledore," Sirius said. "He's going to fight it. He already is. Not just legally." Sirius held his tea in both hands. I've been thinking about this since you told me. About how he'll respond when the verdict goes against him. Albus Dumbledore has spent a very long time being the person everyone looks to. This trial, whatever the outcome, is the first time in decades that someone has publicly said he was wrong and had the standing to make it stick. What does someone like that do when that happens? He does what he genuinely believes is right, Harry said. Which is the problem. He doesn't have malicious responses to setbacks. He has principled ones. He'll decide that the verdict doesn't change the larger strategic picture and he'll keep pursuing what he thinks needs pursuing. He'll be more careful about the methods, but the goal won't shift. And the goal is you, Sirius said. The goal is me as a weapon against Voldemort, Harry said. Which is, look, he's not wrong that Voldemort needs to be dealt with. He's entirely right about that. He's wrong about how and wrong about who gets to decide how and wrong about what dealing with it can cost the person doing it. You're not going to sacrifice yourself, Sirius said. No, Harry said simply. I'm not. Good, Sirius said. Because if you tried, I would personally, he stopped. I don't actually have a threat proportionate to the scenario. But I want you to know I'd come up with one. Harry looked at him sideways. I know, he said. They sat in the library for another hour, not talking much, just inhabiting the same space, and the house settled around them, and at some point Harry fell asleep in the chair and woke at 6 to find Sirius had put a blanket over him and fallen asleep in the other chair himself, which was not the most dignified preparation for a major legal proceeding but was, Harry thought, entirely characteristic and entirely right. Remus made breakfast at 7 with the focused cheerfulness of someone channeling anxiety into eggs, and the three of them ate at the kitchen table, and Sirius was uncharacteristically quiet in the way he went quiet when things mattered to him and he was determined not to make that obvious. The Wizengamot chamber was fuller than it had been in August. Word had traveled. The public gallery, which normally held 50 observers, was packed beyond comfortable capacity, and there were reporters from the Prophet and 2 foreign wizarding publications with their quick quotes quills poised. Harry was aware, in the way he was always aware of these things, that the room had a particular energy, the energy of a moment that everyone present understood was significant, that had drawn people because they sensed, instinctively, that this was one of the days that would divide a before from an after. He sat at the plaintiff's table with Steel Fong, felt the room, and waited. Dumbledore came in and sat in the Wizengamot in his own seat in his purple robes and looked, in his way, absolutely composed. He looked at Harry once, briefly, with an expression that Harry read, correctly, he thought, as a complex combination of genuine respect, genuine sadness, and the particular quality of a man who had decided to accept whatever came without abandoning what he believed. That expression was, Harry thought, both the best and the worst thing about Albus Dumbledore. Ogden called the chamber to order. The formal opening was read. The defense was given their opportunity first, and Dumbledore's legal representative, a precise, clever witch named Harrington who was genuinely very good, presented the intent defense with considerable skill, citing precedent, citing the extraordinary circumstances of the post-war period, citing Dumbledore's decades of service and the context of decisions made under pressure that would have broken anyone less capable. Harry listened carefully, noting what worked and what didn't. The precedent citations were sound. The framing of extraordinary circumstances was compelling. The chamber was listening. Then Steel Fong presented the prosecution's case, document by document, in the methodical, relentless manner of a legal argument that did not need to be clever because it was simply and completely correct. Every irregularity documented. Every statute cited. Every date and signature and missing authorization laid out in sequence. The chamber's mood shifted as the documents went in. Not dramatically, Wizengamot members were experienced politicians, not audiences at a play. But the shift was real. And then Harry stood. The room went very quiet. Not the performed quiet of formal proceedings but the actual quiet of a room of people who were waiting for something specific. He did not look at his notes. He had prepared this, the way he prepared everything, carefully, thoroughly, and now he set the notes aside and spoke. I want to talk about what this trial is actually about, he said. Because there are two versions of this case and I want you to understand both of them. He paused. The first version is legal. A man exceeded his authority. He overrode legal documents, made decisions without authorization, and created conditions that caused documented harm. That version has been presented thoroughly by my legal team, and the documents speak for themselves, and I am confident that this chamber, if it is doing its job, will rule accordingly. He let that land. But there is a second version, he said. The second version is about what it means to believe in someone so completely that you decide their judgment supersedes the law. Albus Dumbledore is not a bad man. I want to say that plainly. He is a man who has done extraordinary things in service of the magical world. He has fought dark forces at personal cost. He has dedicated his life to institutions he believes in. I respect that. The room was very still. But the law is not a suggestion, Harry said. It is not a guideline that applies to ordinary people and becomes optional when someone sufficiently important decides the stakes are high enough. My parents wrote a will. They chose people they trusted to care for their son. That choice was erased by someone who decided he knew better. My godfather sat in a prison for 5 years without trial because someone decided the process was unnecessary. I grew up in a home that no ministry official ever inspected, on a stipend paid in exchange for a standard of care that was never checked, because everyone assumed that the man who arranged it had made the right call. He looked at the chamber. All of it, the full sweep. The question before you today, he said, is not whether Albus Dumbledore meant well. I believe he did. The question is whether meaning well is enough. Whether the person who decides your fate needs to be right, or only needs to believe they are right. Whether the law protects you from well-meaning authority the same way it protects you from malicious authority. He paused. I would suggest to this chamber that if the answer to that question is no, if we decide today that good intentions make legal process optional, then we have built a world where anyone confident enough in their own righteousness can do whatever they like to whoever is convenient, and call it protection. He gathered his notes. 10 million galleons is a significant figure, he said, with almost deliberate understatement. It is meant to be. It is meant to communicate, clearly and permanently, that in this world, in this legal system, the trust of a minor heir is not disposable collateral in someone else's greater plan. He looked directly at Dumbledore's seat for the first time since he'd stood up. Even a good plan. He sat down. The chamber was quiet for 4 full seconds before it began to murmur. The deliberation took 3 hours. Harry, Sirius, and Remus waited in an anteroom that smelled of old wood and the same faint ozone as the atrium, and Sirius paced, which was his version of composure, and Remus read a book with the focused concentration of a man using reading as an anchoring technique, and Harry sat still and thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of preparation. When Ogden's aide came to the door, Harry stood before the aide spoke. He knew. Not from legilimency, not from magic, just from the expression on the aide's face, the particular quality of someone carrying news they have been told to deliver neutrally and cannot quite manage it. The chamber is ready, the aide said. 41-9. The damages were awarded in full. Harry sat at the plaintiff's table when Ogden read the verdict and kept his expression level, but he felt it, the verdict landing, the sound of 41 votes recorded in the official minutes, the permanent shift of something that had been in one position for 5 years moving into another. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at his hands, folded on the desk in front of him. His expression was, Harry thought, the most honest it had been in all the times Harry had seen it in both lives, not performing wisdom or warmth or authority, just a man sitting with a verdict, thinking. After a long moment, Dumbledore looked up, and across the chamber floor their eyes met. Harry didn't look away. Neither did Dumbledore. What passed between them was not triumph on Harry's part. He had felt triumph somewhere in the building phase, when the pieces were coming together and the arguments were forming. He did not feel it now. Now he felt something quieter and stranger, the specific feeling of having changed something permanently, of standing on one side of an irreversible line. Dumbledore's expression shifted, barely, just a fraction, into something that Harry, with everything he knew about the man, read as acknowledgement. Not agreement. Not apology. Acknowledgement, which was its own kind of beginning. Harry nodded, once. Then he turned to Steele Fong, and began the work of what came next. Outside the chamber, in the marble corridor, Sirius grabbed him in a hug that lifted him briefly off his feet, which was mortifying and entirely fine. 41, Sirius said. 41-9. I heard the number, Harry said, muffled. 41. Sirius put him down. His eyes were bright in a way he clearly had no intention of discussing. Your mother would have, he stopped, shook his head. She would have had thoughts about the third paragraph. She would have said the even a good plan line was slightly theatrical. Was it? It was completely theatrical. It was also perfect. She'd have said both things. I know, Harry said. Remus was smiling, which on his face was still slightly startled looking, like a man who kept expecting good things to be revoked and was learning, incrementally, that they weren't. In the corridor, people were moving, reporters, ministry officials, Wisengamot members dispersing. Augusta Longbottom caught Harry's eye across the crowd and gave him a single sharp nod, which he returned. Amelia Bones was talking to a colleague nearby and looked up briefly, and the expression on her face was the one he'd first seen in the DMLE conference room, satisfaction at process correctly executed, unsentimentally felt. And then, in the corridor's movement, Harry saw something that wasn't on any list or plan. A woman in the public gallery entrance, dark red hair, not quite the exact shade he'd grown up looking at in photographs, but close enough that his chest did something without his permission. She was standing with a man with untidy black hair and the beginnings of a beard, and they were both looking at him. Not his parents. He knew that. The dead did not come back from the stone simply because he held the bloodline that made the stone. He knew that. But the woman had Lily's coloring, and the man beside her had James's build, and they were standing together looking at Harry across a ministry corridor, and after a moment the woman raised one hand in something that was half wave and half acknowledgement. He looked at them for 3 seconds, and something behind his eyes prickled in a way he was not going to examine in a public building, and he raised one hand back. They were gone when Sirius turned to follow his gaze. What? Sirius said. Nothing, Harry said. Are we done here? The paperwork isn't, Ironhook said, appearing from somewhere nearby with the timing of a man who had been managing paperwork all morning and was prepared to continue. Fine, Harry said. Let's finish the paperwork. He turned back toward the office, and Sirius fell into step beside him, and Remus on his other side, and the corridor of the Ministry of Magic was loud and bright and crowded and absolutely ordinary, and outside somewhere in the city a September afternoon was doing what September afternoons did, going gold and long-shadowed and entirely indifferent to the things that had changed in the building beneath it. Harry walked through it and felt the weight of old magic, the 3 bloodlines, the Hallows, the ancient law and the older purpose underneath it all, and felt it not as burden but as foundation. Something solid underfoot. Something to stand on. The work ahead was considerable. But he had, in the space of less than 3 months, freed his godfather, established his legal standing, shifted the political architecture of the wizarding world by a meaningful degree, found the theoretical groundwork for destroying Horcruxes, and begun to build something he hadn't had in his first life and hadn't been sure he could have in this one. A home. People who were in his corner not because they needed him to be the boy who lived but because they'd chosen to be there. That was, he thought, not bad for a 6-year-old. Chapter 6, What he built instead. The first frost came to Wiltshire in early November, thin and precise, laying itself across the manor grounds in the particular way of frost that intended to stay. Harry stood at the kitchen window with his morning tea and watched it coat the wild garden in silver, and thought that by spring he wanted the kitchen garden properly restored, because Remus had opinions about growing his own herbs and those opinions were, on reflection, entirely reasonable. Small thoughts. Domestic thoughts. The kind he was still learning to have without immediately converting them into tactical considerations. Sirius appeared behind him, reached over his shoulder to steal the last piece of toast from the rack, and looked out the window with him. "Frost," he said. "Frost," Harry agreed. "We could do the South Field ward work today. Before the ground freezes." "I was thinking the same thing." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, two people who had found, over the past 2 months, a rhythm of living together that worked, that had, in fact, come together with an ease that surprised Harry, though on reflection it shouldn't have. Sirius was not a complicated person to live with. He was loud, occasionally chaotic, constitutionally incapable of leaving the kitchen tidy, and entirely present in a way that made the house feel inhabited in a way that hollow house-sized things needed. Remus came down the stairs with his teaching notes under one arm and a look of someone who had been awake since 5 doing the reading he set himself before every lesson. "Ward work or defense theory?" Harry asked. "Both," Remus said. "Ward work this morning, theory this afternoon. I want to cover the chapter on intent-based casting. You're ready for it?" Harry nodded. He had been working through Remus's curriculum with the focused pleasure of someone who had, the first time through, absorbed material under pressure and was now revisiting it with the leisure of actual understanding. Remus was a genuinely extraordinary teacher, the kind who didn't simplify things but found the right angle of approach, who asked questions rather than providing answers and then provided the answers in the moment when you'd done enough of the work to receive them properly. They spent the morning in the South Field with Ironhook's ward specialist, a goblin named Brightstone who had the lean, focused energy of a craftsperson who took pride in precise work. The Peverell ward designs Harry had found in the library were complex to implement, they required layering in a specific sequence, the intent-responsive elements built last on top of the structural foundations. But Brightstone had reviewed the Peverell texts and declared them sound and had been working on the implementation plan for 3 weeks with the thoroughness of someone who did not want to get this wrong. Harry worked alongside Brightstone, not directing but assisting, learning the ward structures by doing them, which was the only way to properly understand magic at this level. His hands in the cold morning soil, tracing lines that connected to the older lines already there, and the slow, deep satisfaction of feeling old magic respond to proper attention. Sirius worked nearby, reinforcing the boundary stones, his magic large and somewhat inelegant but fundamentally powerful in the way that Black family magic always had been, blunt where Peverell magic was precise, but complementary in a way that Harry was beginning to understand was not accidental. 3 bloodlines. 3 different qualities of magic. They didn't simply add when they converged. The owl arrived mid-morning, swooping across the frosted South Field with the directness of Ministry Post. Harry straightened from the ward line he'd been tracing and took the letter, cracking the official seal without ceremony. It was from Dumbledore. Not from his legal team. Not through formal channels. A personal letter, in the recognizable looping handwriting, on plain parchment without official headings. "Dear Harry, I find that I owe you a letter that is not filtered through legal representatives or the protocols of formal proceedings, and I have been composing it in my head for several weeks without successfully completing it, which is unusual for me. I am generally considered a capable correspondent." The verdict was correct. I want to say that plainly, because I have been told, by people whose judgment I respect, that my tendency to qualify important statements with context has occasionally obscured the statements themselves. So, the verdict was correct. What I did was outside my legal authority, regardless of my intentions, and you were right to pursue it. I want to explain my intentions, not to excuse the actions, but because I think you deserve the explanation. I believed, and continue to believe, that what is coming requires a specific kind of person to face it. I made decisions based on that belief that I would not make again, knowing what I know now. What I know now, specifically, is that you are not the weapon I was attempting to create. You are considerably more than that. I am not certain I understand what you are, which is itself remarkable, as I am generally considered to understand a great deal. I would like, if you are willing, to speak directly. Not about legal matters. Not about the cases or the filings. About what is coming and how we address it together, or separately, or in whatever configuration makes sense. I have information that you likely need. I suspect you have information that I certainly need. I find that I am, for the first time in quite a long while, uncertain about the correct path, and I am choosing to say so rather than proceeding with false confidence. If you are willing, I will come to Potter Manor at a time of your choosing. I will come without agenda beyond conversation. Yours, with genuine respect, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, and went back to the ward line. Who was it? Sirius called. Dumbledore, Harry said. I'll tell you at lunch. Sirius's expression, at this distance and angle, covered a significant range of feeling in under 2 seconds. Right, he said, and went back to his boundary stone with the focused energy of a man channeling complicated feelings into physical work. At lunch, Harry put the letter on the kitchen table. Sirius read it with his arms crossed and his face working through things. Remus read it more slowly, with the careful attention of someone parsing for subtext. He's asking to come here, Sirius said. Yes. To this house. Yes. And you're going to invite him, Harry said. Yes. Sirius opened his mouth. He has information about Voldemort's movements that we don't have, Harry said. He's had 20 years to study Riddle's history and methods. His intelligence network, the Order, even dormant, has access to information channels we don't. And he's right that I have information he needs. Harry picked up his fork. We can't afford to waste his intelligence because we're angry at him. The anger is legitimate and the damages are paid. Now we move forward. The anger is legitimate and the damages are paid, Sirius repeated, slowly. You're 6. You keep noting that, Harry said. Because it keeps being relevant, Sirius said. A normal 6-year-old would still be furious. I am somewhat furious, Harry said. I'm also practical. Both things are true. Remus was looking at the letter again. The line about not understanding what you are, he said. He means that. I know, Harry said. And it concerns him, Remus said. Not because you're a threat. Because he's built his entire plan around a version of you that you've comprehensively demonstrated isn't accurate, and he doesn't have a replacement plan. Which is why he's asking to talk, Harry said. We give him the conversation. We give him some of what he needs. He gives us what we need. We build something functional. He paused. And we do it on our terms, in our house, with our ground rules, and if he can't work within that then we know what we're dealing with. Sirius looked at the letter for another moment. Then at Harry. I want to be there, he said. When he comes. I was counting on it, Harry said. He wrote back to Dumbledore that afternoon. Saturday, 11 o'clock. Come to the front door. Bring nothing. The response came before dinner, thank you. I will be there. The week before Dumbledore's visit was not wasted. Harry and Remus covered the intent-based casting theory, which was exactly as interesting as Remus had implied, a framework for understanding that magic was not purely technical, that the caster's internal state was a variable in every spell, and that the wizards who had historically achieved the most extraordinary magical results had been working with rather than against that variability. Hermione had understood this theoretically and applied it instinctively. Harry had applied it instinctively for years and was now understanding it theoretically, which felt like being given the map for a country he'd already navigated. On Wednesday, Pettigrew was found. The owl from Amelia Bones arrived in the afternoon, formal and precise, with the quality of a message from someone who had wanted to write it for a while. Lord Potter. We have located the individual you described in the Weasley household. The subject was removed from the premises on Tuesday evening and is currently in DMLE custody under medical hold. Identity confirmed by animagus testing. He is cooperating with questioning. Harry read this at the kitchen table and passed it to Sirius without comment. Sirius read it. He read it again. He set it down with the careful deliberateness of someone controlling their hands. He's in custody, Sirius said. Yes. All these years he was, Sirius stopped. The Weasley family. Arthur Weasley's family. They had him as a pet. They didn't know, Harry said. They couldn't have known. I know that, Sirius said, slightly too quickly. Sirius. I know, Sirius said again, quieter. He looked at the letter. He's going to be tried. He's going to be tried, Harry confirmed. With evidence, with a proper hearing, with a verdict that will be on record. He's going to be in Azkaban for what he actually did, not what he framed you for. The distinction mattered and they both knew it did. Sirius nodded once, slowly, and stood up and went to the window and stood there for a minute, and Harry let him have the minute. The Weasleys, Sirius said, still looking out the window. The boy who had him, the youngest one, he'll be fine, Harry said. They're a good family. Arthur Weasley is one of the more decent people in the Ministry. The boy will be looked after. He paused. I'll send them something. From the Black Estate, formally, an acknowledgement of what they unknowingly harbored and an assurance that any distress caused is regretted. Sirius turned from the window. His expression had done the thing it did when he was about to say something that mattered and was trying to decide whether to frame it lightly. You think of everything, he said. I try to. It's not a criticism. Sirius came back to the table and sat. It's the opposite. I've spent my life being the person who doesn't think ahead and trusts that somehow things work out. He gestured. You're what happens when someone actually does the thinking. I don't know whether to find it reassuring or terrifying. Both are reasonable responses, Harry said. Both, Sirius said, are absolutely what I'm doing. He picked up his tea. Thank you. For Pettigrew. For going after him the right way, not just making it about me. It was about you, Harry said. And about justice. Both things were true. Yeah, Sirius said. They were. Thursday brought Andromeda Tonks. She arrived unannounced, which Harry suspected was a stylistic choice as much as a logistical one. Andromeda Tonks, née Black, had left the family on her own terms and had clearly never developed the habit of asking permission for things. She appeared at the front door with her daughter at her side and the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was executing it before she thought better of it. Nymphadora Tonks was 7, with hair that couldn't quite decide between brown and pink, and she looked at Harry with large eyes that immediately went from cautious to fascinated. You're Harry Potter, she said. I am, Harry said. Your hair is terrible, she said. I know, Harry said. Mine changes, she said. Watch. It shifted to a vivid green, then back to indeterminate, then to a pink so bright it was practically audible. Metamorphmagus, Harry said, with genuine interest. Full or partial? She blinked. Full, she said, in the tone of someone who was used to people being confused by this and was gratified by someone going straight to the correct terminology. Come in, Harry said. Both of you. Andromeda Tonks in the Potter Manor sitting room was a fascinating presence. She had the Black family bone structure and the Black family composure and approximately none of the Black family willingness to use those things for performance. She sat and drank her tea and looked at Harry with the direct assessment of a woman who had been quietly watching the political situation from a distance of several years and had decided, based on the past 3 months, that closer was better. Sirius wrote to me, she said. I know, Harry said. I suggested he might. He suggested you suggested it. Her expression was dry. You're building something. Yes. You want House Tonks adjacent to it. I want you adjacent to it, Harry said. The house is a bonus. You were Andromeda Black before you were anything else, and the Black Library is currently being catalogued and the Black Estate is being managed by Gringotts under my provisional oversight. There are family matters in that estate that are relevant to you and Nymphadora. I wanted you to know what's happening with it from me directly rather than from a legal notice. Andromeda looked at him. Ted would like you, she said, of her husband, who was at work. He likes people who talk straight. I'll meet him, Harry said. The metamorphmagus thing, Nymphadora said, from where she'd been listening with the concentrated attention of a child who had learned that adults had more interesting conversations when they forgot you were there. How did you know it was full, not partial? Because your whole face shifted, not just one feature, Harry said. And the pink was too even for partial. Partial tends to show at the edges first. She beamed. Nobody knows that, she said. Even Mum had to look it up. I read a lot, Harry said. Can you teach me stuff? She asked. Dora, Andromeda said. You're building something, Nymphadora said to Harry, with the reasonable certainty of a 7-year-old who has followed a logical chain to its conclusion. Sirius is in it. Remus is in it. You said you're getting allies. I want to be in it. You're 7, Harry said. You're 6, she said. He had absolutely no response to that. She makes a fair point, Andromeda said, with a composure that was hiding something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. There will be study sessions, Harry said to Nymphadora. Regular ones. Remus runs them. They're at the level of whatever you're working on, not what the ministry thinks a 7-year-old should work on. I'm ahead of where the ministry thinks I should be, she said. Of course you are, Harry said. Come Saturday mornings. We'll start on theory. Nymphadora turned to her mother with an expression of complete vindication. Andromeda looked at Harry with the look of a woman who was, under the composure, actually quite pleased. Saturday mornings, she said. I'll bring Ted. Please, Harry said. Saturday morning came with high gray clouds and no frost for once and the particular quality of a day that was going to be whatever you made of it. Dumbledore arrived at 11 precisely. Harry answered the door himself, which Sirius had opinions about and expressed by standing in the hallway behind him with his arms crossed. Remus was in the sitting room. Andromeda and Ted, who had come for Nymphadora's first study session and then been invited to stay for the meeting at Harry's suggestion, because Ted Tonks was a muggle-born wizard with a career in ministry law and a perspective that was genuinely different from everyone else in Harry's orbit, were in the kitchen with their tea. Dumbledore stood on the front step of Potter Manor in his traveling robes, which were midnight blue, without the usual magnificent flourishes, and he looked at Harry and then at the house and then at Harry again. He looked older than he had at the Wizengamot. Not physically, he had always looked ancient in a way that made you stop thinking of it as age and think of it as something else. But there was a quality to him today that was different from the performance of certainty he usually carried. He looked like a man who had set something down and was still feeling the absence of the weight. Lord Potter, he said. Come in, Harry said. He came in, and nodded to Sirius with an expression that was careful and genuine and carried the specific quality of a person acknowledging a wrong without having yet found the words for it, and Sirius held his gaze for a moment with something complex moving in his face before nodding back, once, in the manner of someone who has not forgiven but has decided not to let the lack of forgiveness be the loudest thing in the room. They sat in the sitting room, Harry and Dumbledore across from each other, Sirius at the window, Remus in the armchair he'd claimed as his in the first week and maintained by presence rather than declaration. Tea. Harry said. Please, Dumbledore said. The tea appeared. Something about Dumbledore receiving tea in James Potter's sitting room while Sirius Black watched from the window and Harry Potter poured was sufficiently strange that all of them acknowledged it wordlessly, in the small pause before Harry sat back down. You said you had information, Harry said. I do, Dumbledore said. Before I share it, I want to address something directly. He looked at Harry and the performance of certainty was simply not there. I spent the past 3 months watching you work, through various channels, and I need to tell you that I was wrong about you in a fundamental way. Not just legally. I built a plan around a child I thought I understood. You are not that child. I know, Harry said. I'd like to understand what you are, if you're willing to tell me. I'm willing to tell you some of it, Harry said. Not all. The full explanation is, it would change how you think about several other things, and I need you to approach those other things with a clean perspective. What I can tell you is that I have considerably more information about Voldemort's methods, his Horcruxes, and what needs to be done to end him than anyone else alive, and that I have had that information since the 1st of August. Dumbledore was very still. The Horcruxes, he said. You know about them. All 7, Harry said. I know what they are and where they are. 5 of them, at least. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The diary is already destroyed. Lucius Malfoy has it and at some point will introduce it into the Hogwarts system. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. The ring is in the Gaunt House in Little Hangleton, and it has a killing curse embedded in it that would destroy anyone who put it on. Don't put it on. The silence in the room had weight. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You know about the ring. I know about the ring, Harry said. And about the curse in it. And about the Peverell stone set in it, which is why I also know that your motivation for wanting to pick it up will be considerable and you should resist it. He paused. I know about your sister. Dumbledore's face changed. Not dramatically, the composure held, because Dumbledore's composure was architectural, not ornamental. But something behind it shifted, something real and very old. You are a remarkable young man, Dumbledore said, very quietly. Tell me what you know about Voldemort's current state, Harry said. Where he is, what form he's in, what he's pursuing. Dumbledore set down his tea. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man who had lived his whole life being the one with the most information in every room and was experiencing what it was like to encounter someone who had done their homework properly. He is in Albania, Dumbledore said. A forest, surviving as barely more than a wraith on the magic of small creatures. He is waiting for an opportunity. He will pursue the Philosopher's Stone if we allow him access to it. Quirinus Quirrell, who will apply for the defense position at Hogwarts next year, is already compromised. Don't hire Quirrell, Harry said. The position needs to be filled. Hire someone else. Anyone else. The revolving door of defense teachers is a symptom of a curse on the position that you placed there in 1956 when you denied it to Tom Riddle. The curse limits tenures to 1 year. It should be removed. Dumbledore went very still again. It can be removed, Harry said. I have a theoretical framework for it from the Peverell materials. It's a layered intent curse, the kind that sustains itself on the ambient magic of the school. It requires a counter-resonance approach to dismantle, which I'm currently developing the practical application for. He paused. I'll need access to Hogwarts foundations. Probably midsummer, when the school is empty. You intend to come to Hogwarts? I intend to fix the defense position, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man processing a very large volume of information at speed. And Quirrell. Find him something in the history department, Harry said. He's academically sound, he's just easily influenced. Remove the temptation and the problem mostly solves itself. He paused. Voldemort will find another host eventually if we don't address him directly. The Philosopher's Stone, is it at Hogwarts? It will be, come September, Dumbledore said. Nicholas Flamel has agreed to allow Hogwarts to provide additional protection. Move it, Harry said simply. I beg your pardon. Move it somewhere that's not a school full of children, Harry said. Give it back to Flamel. Put it in Gringotts under a black family vault seal, no one gets through those. But don't put it in a school and then depend on obstacles that a determined first year could navigate to protect it. Dumbledore opened his mouth. The Mirror of Eriste, the Devil's Snare, the chess set, the logic puzzle, Harry said. I can list all of them. The security is insufficient. Move the stone. The sitting room was very quiet. Sirius, at the window, had turned around and was watching with an expression that was the closest to pure unfiltered astonishment Harry had seen on his face. "Very well," Dumbledore said, after a considerable pause. "The stone will be moved." "Thank you," Harry said. "Now. The locket." Dumbledore frowned. "The locket. Salazar Slytherin's locket. It's a Horcrux. It's currently in the Black family house at Grimmauld Place. It's been sitting in a cabinet in the drawing room for years. Sirius's family had it but didn't know what it was. I need you to confirm for me, from your research, whether the destruction method I've found in the Peverell texts is theoretically sound." Dumbledore looked from Harry to Sirius. "The locket," he said. "In Grimmauld Place. Second floor drawing room, glass-fronted cabinet, third shelf," Sirius said, with the expression of someone pulling up a reluctant memory. "Heavy gold chain. We could never open it. My mother tried cursing it once when she was drunk and it gave her hives for a month." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. "I have been looking for that locket for 3 years," he said. "I know," Harry said. "We'll deal with it together. That's the point of this meeting." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not trying to work around you, Professor. I'm trying to work with you. But that means you work with me, not on me. You share what you know. You implement what I ask you to implement when the logic holds. You trust that I have reasons for what I'm doing even when I can't fully explain them. In exchange, I'll share what I know, I'll tell you before I act on things that affect your domain, and I'll treat you as the intelligent and well-intentioned person you are." "In exchange for being treated similarly," Dumbledore said. "In exchange for being treated similarly," Harry said. "Yes." The silence stretched. Remus, very quietly, turned a page in the book he had not actually been reading. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Then he looked at Sirius. Then at Remus. Then back at Harry. "You have built quite a great deal in 3 months," he said. "I'm just getting started," Harry said. Dumbledore reached forward and picked up his tea. He held it with both hands and looked at it with the expression of a man arriving somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive. "The agreement you're proposing," he said. "It requires me to cede a degree of control over situations that I have managed independently for a significant period of time." "Yes," Harry said. "It does. You understand that this is not simple for me." "I understand that entirely," Harry said. "I also understand that the alternative is continuing to work in parallel with someone who knows things you need to know and who will not be managed or directed or positioned on your board, and that the cost of that alternative, in terms of the actual problem we're both trying to solve, is high." Dumbledore looked up from his tea. "The actual problem," he said. "Voldemort," Harry said. "That's the actual problem. Not legal proceedings, not institutional reform, not who controls what information. Voldemort is the problem that gets people killed, and I intend to end him, and I'd rather do it with your help than without it, and I'd rather do it in a way that means no one has to die if they don't have to die." He paused. "Including me." Something moved in Dumbledore's face at that last line. The old grief of someone who had been carrying the knowledge of what he believed was necessary and was being offered, for the first time, the possibility that it wasn't. "The Horcrux in the scar," Dumbledore said, very quietly. The room went still. "You know about that too," Dumbledore said. "I know about that too," Harry said. "And I know what you thought it meant and what you thought had to happen. And I'm telling you, with the same certainty I've told you everything else today, that you were wrong about that as well." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "It doesn't end the way you thought it did. There's another way. The counter-resonance method I described, it applies here too. The fragment in the scar is unstable. It's been destabilized by the original curse, by Lily's protection, by the magic of the bloodlines. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't require what you thought it required." Dumbledore sat very still for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped down to something Harry had rarely heard in either life, something that was the actual man underneath all the accumulated wisdom and performance and careful management of everyone around him. I have been carrying that knowledge, Dumbledore said, for 5 years. The knowledge that the boy, that you, would eventually need to, he stopped. I know, Harry said, quietly. I'm sorry, Dumbledore said. And it was not a legal apology, not the careful language of formal proceedings, not the intent-based defense of a man justifying his choices. It was the plain thing, the actual thing, spoken by a man who had found the limit of his own wisdom and was acknowledging it. I am genuinely sorry. Harry looked at him. The anger was there, still, the deep, banked kind. It didn't disappear because of an apology. That wasn't how it worked. But it didn't need to be the loudest thing in the room. I know, Harry said. Work with me from now. That's what I need. Dumbledore nodded. Once, slowly. I'll work with you from now. The afternoon was different from the morning. They spent 3 hours at the sitting room table, Harry, Dumbledore, Sirius, and Remus, with parchment and notes and the particular focused energy of people who are all, for the first time, working from the same map. Dumbledore shared his riddle research, 20 years of it, the accumulated intelligence of someone who had been following Tom Riddle's history since the boy was 11 years old in an orphanage. Harry listened with the specific attention of someone cross-referencing against their own knowledge and noting where the gaps were and where the information aligned. Sirius contributed knowledge of the Black family materials and the dark arts theory that had been part of his education before he'd rejected it. Remus contributed the creature magic perspective and the practical defense theory and the occasional sharpening question that reframed what someone had said into its most precise form. It was, Harry thought, what it should have been all along. 4 people around a table with all the information on the table. They confirmed the locations of 4 Horcruxes between them. They identified the approach for the locket, the counter-resonance method, adapted from the Peverell texts, which Harry would develop the practical application for over the coming months. They agreed on Hogwarts access for the curse removal, and Dumbledore promised to provide the relevant ward access codes when the time came. They discussed the diary and the specific way it would need to be intercepted before Lucius Malfoy introduced it into any school environment. Harry outlined the theoretical framework for the Scar fragment, which he was the calmest person in the room about by a significant margin, and watched Sirius go very quiet and Remus press his hands flat on the table and Dumbledore listen with the entire force of his considerable intelligence, and then ask, quietly, 3 questions that were the right questions, the ones that cut to the heart of the theoretical structure, and Harry answered them clearly and thoroughly. You're confident in this, Dumbledore said, at the end. I am, Harry said. On what basis? Harry looked at him. I've thought about it from every angle I have access to, he said. I know the stakes. I'm not being reckless or optimistic. I'm being precise. He paused. Trust the precision. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. I will try, he said, which from Dumbledore was a more significant statement than it sounded. They took a break at 4, because Nymphadora had been in the kitchen with Ted Tonks and Andromeda for 3 hours and had apparently been teaching herself a transfiguration theory that she'd found in the Potter library, and had reached a point where she needed help from someone who understood the advanced theory, which turned out to be Dumbledore, who found this situation in approximately the same way anyone found Nymphadora Tonks, with a mixture of surprise, amusement, and the swift, complete reorientation of someone who has met a person operating on their own frequency. Harry stood at the kitchen window with a second cup of tea and watched Dumbledore explain transfiguration theory to a 7-year-old metamorphmagus across the kitchen table, with Andromeda watching from nearby with the careful look of a mother assessing whether someone was worth trusting with her daughter, and Ted Tonks sitting across from Sirius and talking about Muggle football with the ease of someone who had decided to be completely himself in any given room and had found, as a result, that rooms generally adapted to him. Remus appeared beside Harry. He looked at the kitchen, full, loud, warm, various, and then looked at Harry. You did this, Remus said. We did this, Harry said. You started it, Remus said. 3 months ago in a cupboard under some stairs. Harry looked at the kitchen. Dumbledore drawing a diagram on parchment for Nymphadora, who was correcting it with a confidence that made Dumbledore look genuinely delighted. Sirius laughing at something Ted had said, a real laugh, the one that took his whole face. Andromeda glancing at Sirius and then away with something in her expression that was not nothing. Iron Hook, who had arrived at 3 for the estate paperwork review and had ended up staying for tea, sitting at the end of the table with a biscuit he was eating with the careful dignity of a goblin maintaining professional standards while enjoying a biscuit. "I started it," Harry allowed. "How does it feel?" Remus asked. Harry thought about it properly, the way he'd been trying to learn to do, not deflecting, not converting the question into strategy, just actually checking. "Like something I built," he said. "Not something I survived." "There's a difference." "There is," Remus said quietly. Harry stopped. "There was a time when I thought surviving was the best I could do. That the world was something that happened to me and the goal was to get through it. He looked at the kitchen. "This is better." Remus put a hand briefly on his shoulder, the way he'd done in lessons when Harry had worked something out correctly, light and certain in there. Harry let himself feel it. Later, after everyone had gone, Ted and Andromeda and Nymphadora by Flo, Dumbledore walking down the front drive into the November dark with the particular quality of someone carrying things differently than they'd arrived with them, Harry sat in the library. Sirius came in and sat in the other chair with the chess set it up, and opened with a move so deeply irregular that Harry immediately had to throw out his standard opening response. "Dumbledore," Sirius said. "Yes." Harry said, moving a knight. "I don't forgive him," Sirius said. "I want to be clear. The 5 years, the trial, what happened to James and Lily." "I'm not, I know," Harry said. "But I think," Sirius moved his bishop to the inexplicable square again. "I think he means it. The apology. The wanting to do better." "I think so too," Harry said. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," Harry agreed. "It doesn't make it okay. It makes it a beginning." Sirius looked at the board. "You know he's going to keep having opinions about how everything should go." "Yes," Harry said. "He's Dumbledore. Opinions are structural. And you're going to keep ignoring the ones that are wrong." "Absolutely," Harry said. Sirius grinned, the full one, the unguarded one, the one that made him look 20. "Good." He moved a rook. "Your move." Harry looked at the board. Sirius's position was, as always, conceptually baffling and practically difficult, and he was going to have to think about this quite carefully, and it was going to take 20 more moves minimum, and outside the library windows November had settled over Wiltshire with the full weight of a season that intended to be taken seriously. In the morning there would be more work. The Horcrux theory to develop further. The legislative drafting with Selwyn, who had agreed to the engagement and had already sent 3 pages of notes on the werewolf rights framework that were excellent and slightly intimidating. The ward work on the eastern perimeter. A letter to the Weasley family that Harry had been composing in his head all week and needed to write properly. Nymphadora's Saturday sessions. The Animagus theory, which Sirius was pushing and Remus was structuring and Harry was genuinely looking forward to in a way that was just, interest, enthusiasm, the desire to do something for its own sake. And in 5 years, Voldemort. But Voldemort with all of this behind Harry, all these pieces, all this preparation, all these people who were here not because they had to be but because they'd chosen to be. Harry moved his queen. "Oh, that's interesting," Sirius said, leaning forward. "I've been watching how you play," Harry said. "You sacrifice conventional advantage for positional surprise. But it only works if I respond conventionally." "And you don't respond conventionally," Sirius said. "Not generally," Harry said. Sirius looked at the board with the pure focused pleasure of someone who has been given something to think about. "Right," he said. "Right, okay." He picked up his knight and held it, thinking. Harry watched the fire, and listened to the house, and felt the wards running warm and deep beneath the floor, old magic and new, Peverell precision and black strength and Potter history all woven together in something that was more than the sum of its parts. 3 months. 3 months since he'd woken up in a cupboard with a whole second life in his memory and a clear-eyed furious certainty about what needed to change. He had 3 ancient houses and their seats and their vaults. He had the civil verdict on record, a legal precedent that would mean the next child in impossible circumstances had somewhere to point. He had Sirius, alive and free and sitting across a chess board from him with his whole self present rather than the Azkaban ghost. He had Remus teaching him on Tuesday mornings in the Manor Library and eating dinner in the kitchen every night he was in residence. He had Augusta Longbottom's alliance and Narcissa Malfoy's network and Amelia Bones' institutional integrity and Andromeda Tonks' rare, valuable independence and Nymphadora Tonks, who was 7 years old and had already corrected Dumbledore on a transfiguration detail and been correct. He had Dumbledore himself, not as a managing force but as a resource, as a collaborator, as someone who had finally come to the table. He had the theory for every Horcrux. He had the practical groundwork started on the destruction method, the one that didn't require him to die, the one the Peverell texts had given him and that Ignotus had perhaps always intended would be found, eventually, when the right convergence of bloodlines and understanding came along. He had a plan. A real one, built on knowledge rather than hope, on preparation rather than reaction. And he had this, the library, the fire, the chess game, the house warm around him, 5 years of runway and the intention to use all of it. The world had done its best to make him into a weapon, a symbol, a sacrifice. It had arranged everything with that end in mind, had shaped the narrative so carefully, had built the story around the conclusion that he had to be spent. He had woken up at 6 years old with the memory of what that conclusion felt like, and he had stood up, and he had declined. What he was building instead was not a counterstrike. It was not revenge, not defiance, not the mirror image of the thing he'd refused. It was something altogether different, something he was still learning the name of, something that had to do with the Peverell letter and the kitchen full of people and the chess game and the particular quality of knowing that the people in the rooms around you had chosen to be there. He was building a life. His own, actual life, held in his own hands, shaped by his own choices, populated by people who were his because he had gone and gotten them. That was what he was building instead. Sirius put his knight down on a square that was, once again, apparently insane and probably devastating. "Your move, Lord Potter," he said, with profound satisfaction. Harry looked at the board, and smiled, and thought.